Chapter 201. Punishment. She then continued, speaking of Kampa, why were you peeking at his planet? I was surprised when I noticed someone trying to pry into divine land. Broly tried to keep calm, but he couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock. His vision of truth was something that developed through the crystals of a multiversal force. He didn't think that anyone would notice if he observed them through it. My name is Broly, and I had searched the Super Dragon Balls for quite some time. I thought that the Super Dragon Balls were in his territory. I was here to borrow them. He got a smirk as a response. Broly, the Super Dragon Balls, huh? Truly magnificent objects one could risk their lives for. But why did you think that they were with Lord Kampa? It was just a hunch. After seeing the universal intelligence move to gather them, I thought that the only one that could make them act would be Kampa. This wasn't a lie, as he really thought that Kampa just ordered them. He continued, I heard that Lord Kampa likes to take it comfortable, which was why he used the universal intelligence. I see. Indeed, if he knew of these wishing orbs, he would probably order them to move out to gather them for him. Vados held her chin while tilting her head slightly. She then shook her head. It will be impossible to get your wish, even if you gather all the Super Dragon Balls in this universe. In fact, the Dragon Balls are scattered between the two universes, 6 and 7, but you already knew that, right? With your current strength, you would only barely be able to cross the gap between the universes. Even with your knowledge on time travel, you would be out for a tough journey. She looked at him with meaningful glance. It seemed like she mistakenly thought that he was a time traveler, even though she was right about his knowledge on time travel. He knew that he couldn't deceive her discerning eye with some made-up facts, so he only nodded to that. He also didn't try to correct her misunderstanding of him. How about this? If you gather all the Dragon Balls, I will help you create a path to Universe 7. If you succeed to gather them all in that universe, will be up to you. Broly was a bit confused and decided to ask, Isn't it against the law to travel through time, or to cross to another universe? Why am I not being punished? Vados raised an eyebrow. You want to be punished? No, I was just wondering. Broly shook his head hurriedly. I see. I would have given you a good spanking. Broly's mind went blank for a second. Traveling to another universe isn't forbidden. If you were strong enough to cross that gap and enter another universe, you would have earned your right to do so. Of course, gods wouldn't want to see another gods inside their territory. As for time traveler, it is indeed forbidden, since another mortal had once again created a time machine. Afterwards, the angels and gods of another timeline created a maze between the timelines to prevent easy passage, but I heard from Cronoa that there were some mages that were still traveling through time as they already have the locations of the timelines, but it isn't really my job to police these things. Broly's mind was buzzing. A maze? Did she mean the 1,000 threads of different timelines? Wait, they were created by the gods? How many timelines are there? Vados chuckled slightly. There are 6 real timelines, the rest lead to certain death. It appears that you were lucky enough to get here. Broly couldn't help but shiver. When he pursued Tawa through time, didn't he travel through this maze? He thought he would only be lost in time, but it seemed like he would have died if he took a misstep. 6 timelines? From Tawa's memory, he knew that she and Mira were from the far future of Future Trunks' timeline. The only reason another timeline hasn't been created was through the efforts of the Supreme Kai of Time, Cronoa. Then there should be the main timeline that represents the series and his own timeline. There was also the timeline from which his future daughter came from, so that would be 4 in total, but what about the 5th? Is it, right? It should be the timeline of GT, but what about the last one? Broly shook his head. This wasn't important right now. Before you go, how does becoming the successor of the God of Destruction sound? Vados suddenly asked with a slight smile on her face. However, Broly didn't even need to think about that. Sorry, but I have to decline. It isn't my style to be bound to a job. Vados didn't seem to be mad about the rejection. I see. Maybe it is better this way. Very well. I wish you good luck on your journey. Broly was surprised that Vados only wanted to chat. She didn't have to almost kill him if she wanted to talk. Broly screamed in his head. Thanks dash. Before Broly could finish, her voice sounded out again. Before you leave, I have to punish you. I thought you didn't want to judge me, as it was the job of the Supreme Kai of Time. Vados chuckled sweetly, but in Broly's ears it sounded like that of a devil. I am not talking about your time travels. I still have to punish you for taking a peek in here. Vados pointed at the blue lake next to them. What if you had seen me take a bath? How would you compensate me then? Vados asked with a smile on her face. Don't worry, you won't die. You will just take a time out for now. She waved her staff and Broly disappeared from the spot. Broly's surrounding was filled with a colorful haze. The pressure around him was almost crushing him to death as he struggled to breath. After taking a look around, he realized that it resembled the part where Goku and Vegeta was sent into the staff. Maybe she did the same, and this immense pressure is godly ki. If that was the case, he would need to internalize his ki, so it wouldn't leak out at all, but that wasn't enough. He needed to power up and still keep it inside, otherwise he wouldn't be able to move at all. This was an incredible hard thing to do. It was almost like a natural law to increase one's ki and have it leak it out of one's body. This wasn't only something that could be solved with just a few hours of training. This was an essential step to create godly ki in the body. Broly first got comfortable with the surrounding before planning his next step. If he wanted, he could take a few days to reach the staff and get out of here, but he knew that the time flow was different in here and this environment was a perfect place for training. How could he just abandon it? Even if he stayed in here for several years, it would just be a few seconds out there. He didn't know why she chose this method of punishing him, but he wouldn't complain at all. As he thought about it, he started to train in this strange place by meditating. After a few hours of meditating, he already saw some results, but he couldn't continue as he sensed a new guest. It was one of these robots that had hunted him down, and it seemed like it was undisturbed by the atmosphere. It pointed the arrow with its bow at Broly and shot it. Broly tried to dodge, but the pressure around him made it difficult to move. The arrow deeply pierced into his shoulder, and the robot aimed another arrow at Broly. Broly gritted his teeth as he tried to urge his powers to move without leaking out, but it was just a too difficult thing to achieve right off the bat. It may be possible for the middle-aged Goku and Vegeta in the series, but Broly was far from that level of control as of now. While he tried to wiggle his way out of harm's way, he was repeatedly shot at. After a while, there were dozens of blood-covered arrows floating around Broly. The only silver lining was that this robot seemed to be a lot weaker than the ones he had faced beforehand. In the end, he could just ignore the attacks and try to meditate while an arrow pierced through his skin every 10 seconds like a clockwork. Under these circumstances, his ki was agitated through his pain, increasing the difficulty one level higher. After thinking that it couldn't get worse than this, another robot appeared with a spear in its hand as it headed towards Broly. Really? Being shot at by an archer wasn't enough? This couldn't be called training anymore. This was just pure torture. Well, she did say this was a punishment. Chapter 202, Discovery. Broly looked like a porcupine as he was floating quietly in this strange space. There was no room for more arrows, beside his face and his lower region. If one arrow or a spearhead was aiming for those parts, he would tilt his body slightly to evade these attacks. In fact, after staying for quite some time in this space, he was barely hit by these two robots as of now. He opened his eyes and glared at the two figures in front of him. The arrows that were deeply buried in his flesh suddenly shot out heading straight for the two. The ejection was so abrupt and powerful that these two had barely any chance to dodge the attack. Several arrows went right through their bodies, creating large holes that would be lethal for normal beings. Broly straightened himself while his wounds were healing at a visible rate. The spearman headed in to attack. With minimum movements, Broly dodged the attacks while slowly flowing forward. It looked so effortless as he walked past the onslaught of the dozen spear afterimages. Standing right in front of the robot, Broly tightly grabbed the robot's wrists before taking the spear out of its hands. Broly waved the spear, deflecting one of the arrows that was aiming for the back of his head. With another wave of his hand, the robot split in half. Even though Broly didn't seem to move at all after that slash, the robot started splitting in several pieces. He then turned around and threw the spear right at the robot's chest. It couldn't even move at all as the spear shot through its body. The aftershock wave completely obliterated the upper body of the robots, turning it into 4 separate limbs and a head. After he disabled the two robots, he pulled out the several arrows that he didn't evade. Phew. At least I can meditate in peace now. Broly turned around only to see a dozen of these robots pointing their weapons at Broly before they started swarming him. God damn it, I jinxed it. Broly shouted out as he headed straight into battle. Vados was chuckling as she watched his struggle in the crystal of her staff. Hey Vados, do you know who ate my dash? A humanoid purple hairless fat Egyptian cat shouting angrily as it walked towards Vados. He immediately stopped speaking as he saw the empty plates on the table Vados was sitting at. In shock at his sudden appearance, she backflipped into the air while waving her staff. The table with the plates were directly pulverized, leaving no evidence behind. Oh, Lord Kampa, did you say something just now? She asked with an innocent smile after she landed behind him. She supported herself with the staff, which crystal already turned black again. It was the best meal since a few thousand years ago. Graph. Kappa pulled his ears in front of his eyes as he screamed in agony. He glared at her before turning around. I am going to do my job. My, what a wonderful rare news. Vados said sarcastically. Arg. He turned around before disappearing into the universe. After he left, she sighed in relief. She wanted to watch Broly struggle a bit more, but as an angel she had to attend to Kampa's business. She slightly shook the staff, causing it to blink for a second before catching up to Kampa. On her way, she had opened a portal in the space where Broly was in, which allowed dozens of robots to enter every few days. In fact, the numbers increased as time went on, but she didn't worry about Broly. She already knew of the battle maniac that was thirsting for battle inside this Saiyan. Although he was faced with several dangerous foes and immense pain, He always had a smile on his face, as if he was finally getting something which he seemed to have longed for a long time. If he wanted to, he would make a great god of destruction. Let's go to that starfield. Maybe there is a planet with delicious meals on it. Kappa was already salivating as he thought about various delicious meals he had tasted before. After he exited the divine dimension, he waited for Vados. Obviously, he knew that she couldn't just let him roam around. She needed to advise him on things. But that wasn't important for this god of destruction. The only thing he cared about was that he didn't need to move on his own with her around. He took out Pillow and sat on top of it, waiting for Vados to fly him towards the starfield he had pointed at. You sure you want me to fly you around again? You won't be getting any thinner that way. She looked at Kampa's belly. Just go already. It is rare that I am going on a walk. Let me enjoy it. Kampa said without moving from the spot. She could only shake his head slightly. Well, it is more me walking you. Vados mumbled quietly. Did you say something? Kampa's ears twitched as he thought he had heard her say something. Nope. She quickly denied. With that they shot to the starfield in a form of a large colorful light. Really? Is this all you got? It just tastes bland and has a weird texture. I can't even chew that. Kampa was currently sitting on a big throne while several beings kneeled on the side. There was a giant feast on the table in front of Kampa. One of the kneeling figures emitted a power of a true emperor. This feast was something he would only touch on special occasions. But in the eyes of this humanoid cat they weren't appealing at all. The true emperor couldn't help but tremble heavily as he thought about having dissatisfied this god of destruction. He had heard of this deity from his grandfather, but he had never expected that he would see him himself, much less talk to him. Unfortunately, he not only couldn't leave a good impression, he was now close to losing his life because his taste was different to this god. How frustrating would it be for a being that reigned supreme in most regions of the universe to die because he liked different food? He was sweating heavily as he closed his eyes. He knew he didn't have a chance to oppose this deity. When this god had entered, it took him only a glance to make the true emperor kneel. His only option now was to beg for mercy. Before he could open his mouth to say something, Kampa's voice sounded out again. That is not bad. Do you have more of this? The emperor quickly lifted his head and looked at the food this god took a liking to. Yes, of course. There is much more. He almost shouted due to his excitement. The thing Kampa was munching on was a grilled blobfish. He quickly ordered a subordinate to bring some more. After he waved goodbye to the god, the emperor collapsed to the ground and slept for several days straight. Kampa was currently munching on his fish, not willing to share any of it with the thieving attendant. What is that? Kampa suddenly beckoned Vados to stop in the middle of nowhere. Did you discover something? Vados stopped and asked the god, who didn't bother answering as he flew towards a specific spot. After a few light years of flying, Kampa finally stopped. He was rubbing his chin as he watched the empty space in front of him. He then raised his hand and shot out a key blast. A grand explosion filled the seemingly empty space. After the remaining energy of the explosion disappeared, a giant orange planet was revealed. Inside of this planet one was able to see several dark orange stars. What is this? Seems like you are out of luck, Broly. Vados thought as she watched the Super Dragon Ball that was revealed after the messy space, which had hidden it, was destroyed. Lord Kampa, this is a Super Dragon Ball? What now? These are wishing orbs that can fulfill any wish one desires. The only thing you have to do is gather all 7 across the 2 universes, 6 and 7. Vados calmly explained as she showed several images of the dragon and the 7 Dragon Balls. Any wish I want? We have to find these Dragon Balls. Kampa immediately seemed to have a wish in mind as he was grinning stupidly. All right, I am going to look for them now. She raised her staff and tapped it on an invisible ground. It sent ripples through the empty space. Shortly afterwards, the crystal of her staff started blinking. They waited for a moment as it continued to blink. Then it finally showed 2 planet-sized Dragon Balls at the same spot. Chapter 203, Collecting the Super Dragon Balls. How did you know where to look? Kampa's eyes almost popped out as he didn't think they would find them this fast. Oh, I ran across some information, duh. Good job, Vados. With these 2, we already have 3 in total. Let's go collect them. Kampa didn't think much about her words as he couldn't contain his excitement. He waited for Vados to take him there. It took them several minutes before Vados stopped as they were carrying a planet with them. Kampa looked around and saw the Dragon Balls in another dimension. Suddenly, several laser beams headed for them. Each of these laser beams were as wide as a small house. The scorching heat they radiated could be seen with the naked eyes. The unharmed Vados and Kampa looked at the giant ship from where the shot just came from. Kampa didn't look angry at the fact that they were attacked. He was rather surprised. Since when was the last time someone had dared to attack them? Kampa raised his palm and pointed it at the ship. A golden sphere shot out of his hand and directly landed on the ship. The god and angel duo looked at a fleeing figure that was barely able to jump out of the ship at the last moment. Kampa disappeared from his spot and appeared right in front of the fleeing figure, still with a raised hand. You really shouldn't have attacked us, mortal. Hakai. No, wait, dash, the figure screamed as his body quickly turned into purple bits of light. If Broly had seen the figure, he would have known that this being was the real leader of the universal intelligence. It only took one mistake to end this man's whole career. Without his invisible hand, this universal force would have turned to ashes long ago. It was only due to his wits that this force was able to bloom in this universe in midst of hundreds of experts. Now this agency was as good as finished. Maybe it will struggle for a few more years before inevitable being destroyed. Of course, to Kampa and Vados, this figure was just a small fry in the vast and long history of the universe. Without thinking too much about it, they started to head towards the dimension where the Dragon Balls were being kept and disappeared with them shortly after. They took the Dragon Balls to their own home. Kampa looked satisfied at these wishing orbs before he remembered something. Didn't you say the other Dragon Balls are in Universe 7? Yes, that's right. To have your wish fulfilled, every Dragon Ball is needed. Vados explained. She could already guess what would happen next. All right, we will sneak into their universe and steal their Dragon Balls. We carry them towards our universe and make our wish. This snoozer Beerus is surely still asleep. We will probably have hundreds of years before he is awake again. When do you want to depart, Lord Kampa? Now, of course. We will do this before Beerus notices anything. Kampa grinned while rubbing his hands together as if he was concocting an evil plan. Okay, let's get going then, and please tell me what wish you want to make, otherwise I won't be able to tell if it is a disadvantageous wish. Yeah. With a flash, the two headed towards the edge of their universe at breakneck speed. They quickly entered Universe 7 and started their search for the Dragon Balls. Hey Aaliyah, did you already hear the latest of Cell's rampage in the East Universe? Kana suppressed her laughter as if she heard the greatest joke ever. Aaliyah was currently doing some paperwork while Zangya laid down on the couch, cleaning her nails. Kana continued while laughing in between. I heard that a giant toad mistook him for a bug and tried to eat him, ha ha ha. The frog almost succeeded. She couldn't help herself and played a video on the large screen on the wall. They both looked at the screen where a giant tongue struck Cell's face and started dragging him away. Cell spread out his wings to fly away, but he couldn't detach himself from the tongue. The two stared blankly at the screen, not knowing if they really saw that just now. Cell looked no different to an oversized bug as he was almost eaten by a giant toad. You bastard, I will kill you. Cell snapped and fired several key blasts at the creature, killing it under an onslaught of attacks. Cell panted heavily after getting rid of that toad. But before he could rest, several dozen toads appeared, croaking at Cell. You think you can eat me? I and your species are now mortal enemies. I will not stop until I eradicate your lot. Pfft. Aaliyah and Zangya couldn't keep it in anymore after hearing Cell, the insect, declare himself as the mortal enemies to a bunch of toads. The three then started to analyze everything in the video, taking several screenshots and sending them to their group chat, sharing it with the others, much to the bemusement of Taro and Aze. Even Daz was joking around. Cell was in the same group chat. Suddenly, Aaliyah's screen blinked red, which was followed by Zangya's and Kana's screen respectively. Isn't that the Super Dragon Ball? Zangya asked. Well, it should be, if there aren't other planet-sized Dragon Balls. The three had received a picture of an uncovered spot on a planet. Inside, several stars could be seen. Undoubtedly, this was a Super Dragon Ball. Without waiting, they started to call upon their elites and move towards the location where it was spotted. With their teleportation, they arrived gathered and geared up only an hour after they received the image. They received the one that reported their sighting. They quickly asked for several transporter ships that could together carry this planet-sized wishing orb. While they waited for the arrival of these ships, they patrolled the surrounding space to keep any enemy forces away from this planet. Several emperors quickly received the news of the strange behavior of the Exausian elites. Although they didn't know what significance this planet had for them, they moved out to make some troubles and get whatever Exausia wanted on there. This, of course, was more annoying than of any threat to these super elites. Currently, these emperors and true emperors could hardly be described as more than a good warm-up. The only emperors that were of any threat were those with strange abilities, so although they knew that their strength was already the very peak of this universe, they didn't become careless. Fortunately, these with strange abilities were far in between. After 2 weeks of waiting, their ships were about to arrive, but suddenly a bright light appeared above the planet. Two figures emerged out of the light. One seemed to be a fat humanoid cat, and the other was a beautiful woman with a staff in hand. The duo didn't release any strong fluctuations. In fact, they couldn't feel any energy from these two beings. Witnessing this strange sight made the S-fighters more cautious. Aaliyah had already established herself as the strongest and most competent of Broly's companions. She stepped forward with Kana and Zangya as her escorts to meet the two. However, she didn't attack right off the bat. She felt like the look of that cat, and the women seemed to be close to the description of Beerus and Whis. Excuse me, what is your purpose for coming here? Aaliyah asked with a neutral voice. The women beside the cat shortly had a glint flash up in her eyes. Vados, get rid of them. We need to hurry for the next Dragon Ball. The cat spoke out in a commanding tone. Aaliyah's eyes widened in shock. Vados? Is he Compa? Why are they here in our universe? Broly had only mentioned them briefly, but she could still remember their names. Hey, isn't that Dash? Zhangya whispered with a frown on her face. Aaliyah nodded. Your divineness. We will leave at once. We don't want any trouble. Aaliyah quickly said as she told the others to retreat telepathically. Compa raised an eyebrow as he didn't think that his reputation had spread to this universe, but he wouldn't complain if they complied with them. Just as Aaliyah was prepared to leave, another very similar flash of light appeared not too far away. Afterwards, like Compa and Vados, two figures emerged from the light. This time, the S-Fighters recognized them instantly. Beerus and Whis had entered the stage. Chapter 204, Tournament. I have heard of people getting lost, but you are taking it to new heights. Beerus said sarcastically towards the god of destruction of the sixth universe. Snoozy Beerus is awake for once. Guess there is such a thing as miracles. Compa said in a mocking tone. You want to go? Beerus responded angrily. They stared at each other intensely for a second before Beerus continued. You are in the seventh universe, Compa. Surely you know that the destroyer of the sixth universe has no business being here. Compa put up a hand up his chin as he thought of an excuse. Relax, we were just taking a shortcut. Honestly, why you need to feel to be such a stickler? Beerus only sneered. You sure you aren't here for the Super Dragon Ball? Beerus glanced at the giant orange planet before focusing on Compa again. You know about the Super Dragon Balls? Compa was shocked as he had never heard of them before Vados mentioned them. Humph, I am not an ignorant fool such as yourself. Beerus mocked him with a sneer on his face. Of course, he wouldn't mention that Whis had shortly introduced him to these wishing orbs when they were on their way here. You can forget about getting any of this universe's orbs. As I said, you have no business being in my universe. Beerus said while waving his hands as if he was shooing away. TCH, since you know about the Dragon Balls, you know that they are useless on their own. Even if you collect all of your universe orbs, they wouldn't be capable of exhibiting their true power. Humph. Of course, I knew that. Beerus' mind drifted to the things he could wish for. Most of them were, of course, related to food. What do you suggest? Beerus glanced at him, seemingly uninterested. How about we let a team of, let's say, 5 mortals of our universe fight each other in a form of a tournament? The winner will get the remaining Dragon Balls. Compa became increasingly more satisfied with this idea of his. He turned his back towards Beerus. He didn't want Beerus to see the smile on his face. From what he saw during his stay in Beerus' universe, the strength of the upper level of the mortals seemed to be inferior to his. Additionally, he had a legendary assassin on his side who had astonishing abilities. He could be called invincible in the realm of mortals. Compa finally turned around and immediately became silent. He looked at Beerus, who had a victorious smile on his face. I accept your silly request. Don't come crawling to me after you lost. Beerus said as if he had already won. Compa got a little bit worried after seeing Beerus' expression, but he quickly shook his head. He convinced himself that this was just a bluff. Humph. Let's see how you smile after my contestants crush yours. In a week, we will conduct this tournament. With that, Compa turned around intending to leave with Vados, but they were suddenly stopped by Whis. Wait for a moment. Whis had a friendly smile on his face. I want to add something. I think it would be in everyone's interest if the contestants have at least a basic level of intelligence. It wouldn't be fun to watch mere beast fight it out. I think a written test would be the easiest way to determine the intelligent. The angel and God didn't seem to have anything against that request, and were ready to leave once again, but as before were stopped by Whis. Big sis, aren't you forgetting something? Whis gave her, and then her staff a meaningful look. Vados' smile that she had put up the whole time twitched slightly. Of course, here you go. Both angels raised their staves, almost touching each other. Vados' staff glowed slightly, followed with Whis' staff doing the same. The gods of destruction had question marks above their head, as they had no idea what that was all about. Compa asked Vados about this trade, but was quickly denied by Vados. How could she mention that she had helped their opponents? But how would she know that this encounter results in a duel between mortals of their respective universe? Beerus and Whis watched the two deities of Universe 6 leave. Beerus turned to Whis before asking with a raised eyebrow, what was that all about? Oh, it seemed that the one I told you about wasn't actually lost. It appeared that he had somehow ended up in your brother's universe. Beerus squinted slightly as he tried to remember about whom Whis was talking about. From the corner of his eyes, he saw several mortals still floating near them. Beerus widened his eyes as he seemed to remember. You mean that Saiyan King? Isn't he the one I saw in my vision? You know, the Super Saiyan God. Let him out, I want to have a look at him. I advise against that, Lord Beerus. He is currently close to a breakthrough which would raise his strength to another level. We should wait until he finishes before getting him out of there. Beerus was stumped, but after thinking about the coming tournament, he only nodded his head. The whole reason why Beerus was awake prior to his counterpart of the series was due to Broly's intervention, more specific Exauge's expanding influence. After Broly had left, they didn't stop expanding, and with their increasing influence, the number of their enemies grew. More blood was spilled as time went on. The angel, Whis, had observed the changes and knew that they would have great impact on the mortal level of this universe. As the god of destruction, Beerus needed to make a decision whether to destroy them or not, which was why Whis saw himself forced to awaken Beerus, so he could do his duty as a destroyer. Obviously, Beerus was pissed after being woken up by Whis, but after destroying some moons and planets around his planet, he had calmed down. After he listened to Whis' story, he had no choice other than to take a look at the situation. In the beginning, he thought about eradicating these vandalizing Saiyans as he didn't like this race, but after seeing their work, he decided against it. Although their conquest was being followed with a trail of corpses, he couldn't deny that their actions could very well increase the mortal level of his universe. Exauge's influence didn't only bring destruction but prosperity to several races as well. They mostly killed their enemies who felt threatened by Exauge. Most of those were tyrants that didn't contribute much to the advancement of the universe. Considering these things, Beerus was almost certain that the mortal level would only increase if Exauge stayed on their current path. The only unknown variable was their king. If this king called Broly suddenly thought about reducing the variety of life, Beerus wouldn't hesitate to destroy him, but as of now he would only observe them, or rather let Whis watch over their actions and then inform him. This inevitably caused Whis to notice the encounter of the deities of the sixth universe with the higher-ups of Exauge. They quickly hurried over before Kampa and Vados would mess around with these Exaugians. Beerus was surprised that Broly was able to garner Vados' attention. Maybe he could get some information about the mortals of Universe 6. His train of thought was suddenly interrupted as a sweet voice sounded out in front of him. A beautiful woman with an incredible body was calling out to him. "Excuse me, your divinity, but did you perchance mention our king?" Beerus looked at her for a second, thinking that he had seen her beside Broly. Her strength as a mortal was exceptional as well. It would do him good to keep her around. "Yes, indeed, I mention your king." Beerus looked at the other wives of Broly, who had a similar level of strength before deciding on something. He pointed at them and spoke out in forceful manner before they could say something. "You three are coming with us." Whis understood. Whis seemingly knew what Beerus wanted from him. He waved his staff towards the two Saiyans and Hera. A milky light enveloped the three powerhouses as well as the Super Dragon Ball. Beerus then moved behind Whis and put a hand on his shoulder before everyone was being dragged away by Whis. Enveloped in a colorful light, Whis waved his staff a couple of times. Each time a portal appeared and a few of the white robots, which looked of the same kind that Broly had been fighting, shot out and headed into the vast universe. They instantly moved towards near planets in search for the Super Dragon Balls. They still needed to find the other Dragon Balls, so every one of these orbs would have been gathered after the tournament. The group soon arrived in the divine realm of the god of destruction. They didn't waste any time as they landed beside a large lake on Beerus' planet. It was one of Beerus' favorite spots due to the mass of delicious sea monsters inside the water. They landed safely on the ground while a giant orange planet filled part of the sky as if it was just another moon or planet that revolved around Beerus' planet. Chapter 205. Show me what you've got. The three girls cautiously looked around the weird-shaped planet. They saw a giant forest in the distance. The air had a pleasant feel to it, as did the gravity. It was neither too great nor too light. It was about the same gravity of Exauge. Beerus looked at the two Saiyans and the Hera. "I imagine you have heard our conversation with Kampa, right?" The three nodded in response. From time to time they glanced at Whis' staff. They were aware that Broly, who had been away for almost a year, was training inside of it. Although they couldn't see him, they were relieved knowing that he was fine. They had never suspected that there was someone capable of hurting him, but after knowing that there are several different universes with unknown dangers, they still couldn't help but worry about him. Now he had finally returned. They wanted to see him again, but remembering what Whis had said to Beerus, they could only wait a bit longer. "I know that you are quite strong, but I want to experience your power myself." Beerus stretched out his arm and waved his fingers toward himself, gesturing for them to come at him. "Don't hold back. If I am dissatisfied, I will destroy you." The three looked at each other before nodding. Zangya and Kana walked a few meters to the side, so everyone had enough room. Each of them looked at the cat in front of them as they steeled themselves to engage this god. In a burst, the three transformed, while being enveloped in a golden or green light respectively. Kana's and Aaliyah's hair started glowing brightly, outshining the glow of their ki that enveloped their body. Their hair grew even longer than it previously was, almost reaching the ground. This was of course an area to be exploited by the enemy, but since Super Saiyan 3 was a lot stronger than the previous form, they could only ignore this small flaw. The problem of exhaustion in comparison was much greater. After Broly had left for Universe 6, they had visited the hyperbolic time chamber at one point. Broly had told them, if there was an enemy they couldn't deal at the moment, they should go inside the hyperbolic time chamber and use the slow time to get stronger. While expanding into the universe, the enemies of Exausia increased, and the strength of these enemies increased as well. There was a point where Exausia was being threatened to be destroyed. Even if the numbers of Super Saiyans had grown, there was a limit of what quantity could achieve. This had forced the higher-ups to take it upon themselves to gain an advantage with the time chamber. With the strength of Super Saiyan 3, they were almost unmatched in the universe, showing the advantage of the Saiyan race. Surprisingly, based on the fluctuations, Zangya of the Hera race didn't lose to them at all in terms of power. Zangya's hair turned red and she grew in size a little bit. Her body became more muscular but still remained lean. Her strength rose a couple of times. Her transformation still looked the same, but it had already undergone a qualitatively change after all the years of training. They stood shoulder to shoulder as they solemnly looked at Beerus, who seemed to stand wide open, but this couldn't deceive their experienced eyes. Although they were confident that almost no one was able to contend against their strength, this of course didn't include the god of destruction and his attendant. They had heard of his mighty strength from Broly. He said that only after they achieved Super Saiyan 4 or God, they could hope making him somewhat serious. Broly had told them that even though their universe had a low mortal level, this didn't reflect the strength of Lord Beerus. In fact, it was implied that he was the strongest, or at least one of the strongest gods of destruction, as shown in the manga of the series as he faced of all the other gods all at once. The mortal level in general wasn't a specific reflection of the strength of the individual mortals, but an average of all kinds of data like diversity and the numbers of advanced civilization. Despite knowing that they were likely to be crushed beneath Beerus' finger, they didn't hold back at all as they stomped the ground, accelerating towards the god of destruction. Every step they took on the ground left a deep footprint. If this ground was from a normal planet, these footprints would be craters in size of several meters. The three advanced towards Beerus from three sides. Their punches carried a forceful wind that swayed the plants and the rocks on the ground. Beerus indifferently looked at the incoming punches. Instead of retreating, he stepped forward and like a leaf in the wind, he swirled around their attacks like it was nothing. From an outside perspective, it looked like the three women were moving in slow motion. Beerus suddenly appeared in front of Aaliyah and flicked her forehead. Without being able to resist, her body was sent flying across the ground. Half of her body was in the ground, creating a wide trench. Only after a while, she shook her head, getting rid of the dizziness caused by the attack. She gritted her teeth, opening her eyes trying to locate the god of destruction. After coming out of her daze, her eyes widened in shock. She saw Kana knocked out in a large crater, and Zangya collapse with Beerus standing behind her with the edge of his hand at her neck. Aaliyah clenched her fist, and then pushed herself out of the trench. She slightly stumbled forward before stopping. She looked at the ground and saw 2 feet right in front of her. She looked up and saw Beerus frown slightly. Your strength is not bad, but also not great. After saying that, he disappeared from Aaliyah's line of sight. Her 5 senses didn't register anything, but her instincts and battle experience told her where the strike was coming from. She immediately ducked and pushed herself from the ground with her hands, while kicking out to the left behind her. The very moment she kicked out, she noticed the fierce wind passing above her. In that instant, she felt her feet strike against something unmovable. Without hesitation, she spun around and delivered another kick. However, like before, her foot was caught. Now, after turning around, she saw Beerus grasping both of her ankles. Beerus smiled slightly. Really not bad. He then rose her body before slamming her on the ground, instantly knocking her out. Beerus looked at the 3 women that were knocked out before he called out to Whis. What do you think, Whis? Whis smiled as he observed the 3. They weren't in any mortal danger, so he wasn't worried about them dying. Based on their strength and the way they moved, they are experienced fighters and probably the best we have got right now. Especially that girl. Yeah, I think so too. Heal them. Maybe they know of someone even stronger than themselves. Whis waved his staff, and in an instant the 3 were enveloped in a gentle green light. It took a second before their eyelids twitched and woke up. They looked around confused at first before remembering what happened. They were deeply shocked at the strength Beerus had displayed. Although Broly told them that he was strong, they had never thought what strength these gods could achieve. Each of them was knocked out by casual attack of this god. They truly were frogs in a well. Beerus had a smile on his face as he saw the astonished expression of these mortals. You are not bad, but I only want the very best. Tell me, do you know of warriors whose strength exceeds yours? The 3 looked at each other before Zangya opened her mouth. Although they won't want to admit it, there are 3 Saiyans who are not from Exausia who are stronger than they are. Kana frowned deeply as she stared at Zangya before crossing her arms and turned away. Aaliyah also had a bitter smile on their face, but looked much better than the pouting Kana. It was true that their Saiyan pride wouldn't allow for them to admit it, but there were more talented Saiyans than they were. Aaliyah was still fine as she was around the same strength as they were, but Kana was already slightly outmatched. However, it was only a matter of time until she was surpassed as well. Kana always said that the only reason they advanced that fast was because of the hyperbolic time chamber, which has been modified by Dent, allowing a person to enter the hyperbolic time chamber without restriction. Especially after she had visited this chamber herself, she always said that she would have been a lot stronger if this chamber didn't exist. The other Super Saiyans didn't deny this, but they all knew that even without it, they would be eventually surpassed by these Earthlings.
Ich chapter 206. Beres versas. Z-Fighters.
Other Saiyans whose strength surpasses yours? Tell me, where can I find them? Beerus didn't care if their pride was hurt due to someone being stronger than they were. They live on a planet called Earth in the Milky Way galaxy. Zangya answered Beerus. Beerus turned towards Whis and asked him to search for that planet. It didn't take long until Whis was able to project the planet in his staff. He zoomed to the middle of the ocean before stopping after displaying 3 groups sparring against each other. Yes, those are the ones I was talking about. Zangya nodded after seeing the figures that displayed mighty strength, creating huge fountains that seemed to pierce through the sky. All right, I will take a look at them. Hopefully they are as good as you say. Beerus shot a glance at the Saiyans before walking behind Whis and placing his hand on his shoulder. He then turned his head towards the 3 women. What are you waiting for? You are coming with us as well? The 3 quickly hurriedly behind Beerus. Beerus suddenly felt someone place a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head and glared behind him, only to see Aaliyah smile at him. We are ready. All right, let's go. Beerus stopped paying attention to the 3 mortals and closed his eyes. As Whis is the fastest flyer in the universe, it didn't take long until they pierced into Earth's atmosphere. However, they didn't land above the ocean but in a bustling city. The groups, which were sparring a moment ago, had already returned and were now resting. They landed in a large garden, which was separated from the streets by quite a distance. There was a round building with the letters Capsule Corporation written on the outer wall. After landing, they looked around to see several Earthlings, sitting on some tables, looking at them. They have, of course, noticed them as well. A woman with blue hair stood up and wanted to shout at them before she quickly stopped. Bulma recognized the women that were standing behind a humanoid cat. Vegeta, they are here. Bulma screamed out. A blurry figure suddenly shot out of the building right in front of her. Following that figure, a few others shot out of the room as well. They lined up, standing shoulder to shoulder. Right in front of Bulma was the former Prince Vegeta. Although he wouldn't admit it now, or maybe wasn't aware of it yet, but Bulma had already occupied an irreplaceable spot in his heart. Next to him was Goku, who was smiling slightly as he looked at the 3 women. He was already familiar with their strength and knew that he was almost stronger than each of them individually. He was confident to strike them back if they engaged again. The women, Ace, Taro, and new Super Saiyans, each fight had constantly visited Earth for quite some time and fought with the Z-Fighters. Usually the Exausians had always won, but after some time, they were being pushed back. It was Aaliyah's idea to use the Earthlings to train and test the strength of the new Super Saiyans. With the combined power of the other S-Fighters, they were confident that they could pull them out if things got heated. The Z-Fighters were somewhat aware that they were being used as training material, which pissed Vegeta off majorly. However, he and the others noticed that this external threat pushed them to new heights as well, which was why these 2 opposing groups came to an unspoken agreement to sharpen each other. The Z-Fighters' resentment and fear of them had lessened greatly due to that. Of course, what Jain had told them made them believe that the only evil one was King Broly, who forced the other Saiyans to act. The Z-Fighter had never encountered Broly after he told them that he would visit them in a few years to destroy them. Knowing that Broly was probably away, they had tried to bring these Saiyans to their side without avail. Next to Goku and Vegeta stood Gohan, Piccolo, Raditz, Jain, and Bardock. After the whole incident with Mechikabura, the Supreme Kai of Time, Kranoa, had sent Bardock back to his original timeline, specifically to his wife, Jain. After Jain saw Bardock in front of her doorstep, she sobbingly leaped into his arms. She hugged him tightly as if she was worried that he would disappear the moment she let go. Only after dozens of minutes did she finally let go of him. Unknowingly, Raditz had joined their hug. His eyes were teary, but he had a big smile on his face. It was probably the happiest moment in his life. Finally, his family had found back together. They had quickly invited Goku over. When he opened the door, he was stunned for a second as a person that looked exactly like himself was standing right in front of him. They stared at each other before Bardock called out to him. It has been too long, Kakarot. Bardock walked towards Goku and embraced him. Goku hadn't realized it, but tears were already flowing down his face. After being embraced, he shakily returned the hug. His memories of his escape of planet Vegeta returned to him. Although it was blurry as it was too long ago, he could still recognize the love he felt back then. I am back, Dad, Goku muttered as they held each other. They had spent several weeks to catch up on everything that happened. They were surprised when they had heard that he fought alongside Broly. The stories about these demons made Goku even more fired up. He was aware that Broly was getting stronger with every second, and he needed to give it his all to keep up. The Z-fighters turned towards the cat who was stepping forward and cleared its throat. Vegeta suddenly froze as he looked at the being that was about to speak. "Hello, Earthlings. I heard that there were powerful warriors amongst you. Is that true?" Beerus raised an eyebrow as his gaze wandered across the lineup. "Lord Beerus, the god of destruction?" Vegeta suddenly exclaimed. He took a step backwards. "Oh-ho, you know who I am." Beerus glanced at Vegeta. He couldn't help but feel surprised. This was the second time he was recognized by a mortal. Vegeta's respect towards this deity went deep and way back to his childhood. He unknowingly stepped backwards several times until he bumped against the unsuspecting Bulma. He turned his head and saw that she was looking confusedly at him. He gritted his teeth and looked straight at Beerus. He stepped forward and spoke out. "Indeed. Since you are followed by these three, you are probably searching for us." His cowardly behavior vanished as if it had never been there to begin with. Beerus found this interesting. All these mortals knew of him. Yet, even though they were respectful and initially fearful, they quickly recovered from their fear and had a determined will to move forward. Of course, this wasn't something new. He had lived for several millions of years. There were several individuals that showed the same will. It was only rare to see a bunch clustered together. "I want to see how strong you are. If you satisfy me, you are allowed to join my team in the incoming tournament," Beerus said casually. "Tournament? Like a martial tournament?" Goku asked as he looked interested in this so-called god of destruction. "Yes, a tournament between universes. Now prepare yourself, or else you will die." Beerus suddenly flew towards them at great speed. With a kick, Beerus aimed at Piccolo, who quickly raised his arm to block the strike. His arm immediately broke, and he was sent flying. Beerus suddenly swayed around an incoming fist. As he approached Raditz, he picked up a pair of chopsticks lying on the table. In a swift manner, he tapped Raditz's body several times with the chopsticks. Raditz instantly fainted. Jine and Bardock quickly followed up and attacked Beerus from both sides. They barely were able to throw a fist or two before they were blasted away. Vegeta, Goku, and Gohan were the last remaining. The three, like the others, had already turned into Super Saiyan 3, but their speed was several times of that of Raditz, Jine, and Bardock. Their speed rose in a burst as they unleashed a fury of attacks. However, every attack felt like they were punching into a swamp. No attacks of theirs connected and disabled. Beerus quickly disposed of Gohan with a quick sweep of his tail. Suddenly a stretching arm approached him, trying to tie Beerus up. The god only backflipped over the arm and shot a ki blast at the source. Vegeta and Goku followed up quickly. They perfectly fought together as they engaged this god. Due to the threat of exhaustion, they had fought with each other several times. They also sparred against each other, so they knew the fighting style of each other. Their teamwork was top-notch, but they still couldn't land a single hit on Beerus. Beerus was constantly moving backwards and evading the attacks as he observed the movements of these two. It seemed like he was especially satisfied with Goku and Vegeta. Beerus nodded slightly before he passed them in a flash. No one was able to see what happened. The only thing that occurred afterwards was the falling bodies of the two Saiyans. Chapter 207, Gathering Contestants. The Exausians looked at the Z-fighters with complicated emotions, especially when they looked at Gohan. He looked like a young teenage boy, hardly able to be considered an adult, yet he could stand at the side of his father. The only thing that was lacking was his experience in terms of fighting. It was a good thing that his mother, Chi-Chi, didn't hold him back, otherwise a lot of his hidden potential would have been wasted. Now, compared to his counterpart in the series, who slacked off, he was much stronger, even going as far as turning into Super Saiyan 3. After knowing that Broly would come to destroy the world in the future, coupled with the lack of confidence of Goku at that time and his pleas, Chi-Chi had compromised and let Goku train Gohan to be of help when the time needs him. It was something Broly had hoped to see but was hardly confident that it would come out this way. Chi-Chi was really unreasonable in the series and always hoped for Goku to solve the planetary threats. Of course, as a mother, she didn't want to lose Gohan. She wanted that he would become successful in the future, but by burying him underneath books and wanting him to be a scholar, he would have no way to defend himself in the future. All his studying would be for naught, and he would end up dead. Beerus looked at the group of mortals and was rather satisfied with their strength until Whis threw in some advice. "Lord Beerus, I think it would be better to include some other warriors as well. We have too many Saiyans in our team. I advise to have some diversity in our team. So in case that the Saiyans aren't able to defeat Compass contestants, we have some beings with different abilities." Beerus rubbed his chin with closed eyes. He nodded and spoke out. "Indeed, we should only pick the best and have some variety. We still have time to decide and search for others. Until then, we keep these ones here in top shape. It would be best to train them all until we know who we really want to take with us." He stopped pondering and looked at the unconscious mortals on the ground. He then prepared to leave again. Whis waved his staff and the bodies of the unconscious fighters started flying towards the two deities. Bulma and Chi-Chi were trying to stop the bodies, but to no avail. The three Exaugians silently followed the deities. They wanted to explain what was happening and that they shouldn't worry, but the god of destruction didn't seem to intend to wait. With a flash, they disappeared into the vast universe, leaving the shocked and worried Earthlings behind. While they were flying, Beerus spoke to the Exaugians. Do you have any other possible candidates? He couldn't help but ask. He wasn't nearly as knowledgeable as the higher-ups of the powerhouse called Exaugia about potentially strong individuals. Yes, there are two more, who have exceptional strength, especially one of them is an all-rounder with many different abilities. One of them belongs to Exaugia, while the other has his own force. They are called Cell and Cooler. We can call upon Cell, but we only roughly know where Cooler is moving around. We will pick up these two on our way. It would take too long if we have to wait for this Cell to return via spaceship. Beerus nodded and tapped on Whis' shoulder, indicating that he should look for these two. Aaliyah told Whis where these two should be. Whis didn't complain as he stopped in the middle of space. His staff started blinking shortly, until two images were being projected outwards, revealing a green planet and a giant spaceship, respectively. Without waiting for any commands, Whis chose the one that was closest and started flying towards him. While they flew through space, Beerus suddenly smelled something delicious. Even Whis' nose was twitching slightly. Whis stopped and both deities turned around. They saw how Kana was munching on something dark with nuts in it. It was giving off an unusually delicious smell. It didn't look like much, but these two foodies knew that they had a delicacy in front of their eyes. Well, what is that? Beerus asked while salvia was dripping out of his mouth. Kana looked at him confused before she saw him stare at the chocolate bar in her hands. She broke off two small pieces and gave it to the two deities. They both inspected the piece of sweet chocolate before putting it in their mouths. They both closed their eyes and moaned out in sync. They were relishing in the taste, completely forgetting about their image in front of these mortals. Aaliyah seemed to remember that Broly told them that if they somehow offended them, they should use delicious food to disperse the hostility. She nudged Kana. Remember what Broly told us? These two are foodies. They probably want more of your chocolate. It will be good to get some goodwill. She said telepathically. Kana looked how these two enjoying the piece to the fullest. It was like they were experiencing heaven itself. She then looked at the remaining half of her chocolate bar. Her eyes constantly switched between the gods and her chocolate bar. It wasn't often when she would enjoy something sweet. She had seen several ads for diets on Earth when she had visited. She thought she needed to carefully choose her food, which was in fact unnecessary as her Saiyan body would just turn it into energy. It was nearly impossible for a Saiyan to get fat. Beerus let the chocolate dissolve on his tongue before opening his eyes again. He eagerly looked at Kana, who had puffed up cheeks. She turned her head away from the god and tried to whistle, but her mouth was too full. Only a soft blow came out. Aaliyah was silently facepalming behind Kana. Beerus was about to get angry, but was suddenly accelerated again, almost throwing Beerus off. Whis, at least give a warning. Beerus turned around and screamed at Whis. From where she got this delicious delicacy will surely be more, but I believe gathering the other two warriors is of more importance, right? Whis slightly chuckled while giving Beerus a glance. Beerus didn't say anything further and could only sit down reluctantly. After a few short minutes, they arrived at a deep green planet. The planet was covered in thicket and swamps. There were several beasts on this planet, but the strongest could barely reach the level of a former elite-class Saiyan warrior. One could hear someone laughing manically, followed by a giant explosion. The group quickly reached the source of the explosion and saw a humanoid bug stepping on a giant frog's head. After the incident, he had visited numerous planets only to kill frog-like creatures. Now he breathed out satisfied. After the several days of hunting them down, he had vented his frustration and calmed down. He suddenly noticed several beings floating in the air, looking at him. He recognized the unconscious group, as well as the three women who were holding back their laughter. Dark lines appeared on his forehead as he was once again reminded of the shameful situation. Additionally, he was seen throwing a fit. He became frustrated again. He took a deep breath before he looked at the two beings at the front, who were scrutinizing him. The two didn't leak out any energy. If they weren't floating in the air, he would have thought that they were powerless creatures like the Earthlings. Hello, long time no see. I see. You brought someone to visit me. I suppose they are someone important? Cell said with a neither smug nor humble attitude. He didn't even spoke harshly towards the women, who were almost laughing at him. His previous smug attitude was nowhere to be seen. It seemed like he was taught some lessons by these women. I shall introduce myself. I am Beerus, the god of destruction. Beerus held his chin high as he looked down at Cell. He noticed that it was a creature, created through a mixture of some of the warriors he had knocked out. There were obvious trails of Friesia's DNA. The energy he gave off also had traces of other races in it, but they weren't as prominent. While Beerus was observing Cell, so did Whis. Whis, however, didn't have the mixture of the DNA in mind as it wasn't something he had never seen. He was looking at something else. There was a strange glint as he looked at Cell before looking deep into the black of the crystal of his staff. He quickly returned to his neutral expression with a slight smile hanging on his face. I am going to test both of you at the same time. Whis, take him with us and fly towards this fella called Cooler. Understood, Lord Beerus. Whis waved his staff and enveloped Cell in a milky glow. Cell tried to struggle, but he was too disadvantaged. His strength couldn't even remotely break him out of this energy. Chapter 208, Golden Cooler. A blue humanoid with a transparent screen in his hands was currently speaking with someone who was sitting in a large chair and swirling around blood-red wine in his glass. If we want to conquer the Black Eye Galaxy, we have to move dash. Lord Cooler. Suddenly someone burst into the room. His face showed his anxiousness, and after he came into the room, he breathed heavily while trying to say something. However, no one could understand what he was saying. Cooler on the chair frowned slightly as he turned towards the subordinate, who just burst into his room. Calm down and breathe. Tell me what happened. Cooler ordered. The subordinate immediately took several deep breaths, and just as he was about to speak again, another voice sounded out above them. Oh, I think I remember you now. Aren't you the big brother of Frisia? The voice carried a pressure with it that made everyone in the room shiver. Cooler was shivering as well, but it was only partly caused by this unusual pressure. He recognized the voice. It was deeply buried in his memories, and the fear he associated with it ran deep. Cooler looked up and saw the entire roof of the cockpit of his ship ripped open. In the middle of the hole stood he, the god of destruction, Beerus. Cooler wanted to say something, but before he could even make a sound, Beerus called out to someone called Whis behind him. Immediately afterwards, Cooler was kidnapped by this god, leaving the frightened subordinates behind. Cooler was floating on his back as he was being dragged behind the god and angel duo. He saw several other beings, of which he recognized some. He was about to ask, but after remembering who was dragging him, he didn't dare to speak out loud. It was obvious why he would be confused when the others were casually talking about some stuff, while healing the unconscious bunch. He wanted to hush them, but he was still floating helplessly in the air. If he now called out to them in his awkward position to shut them up, wouldn't he just make a fool out of himself? He tried to struggle to get out of this weird energy, which was enveloping him, or at least straightened himself, so that he didn't look like a turtle on its back. Fortunately, he wasn't the only one who had his freedom taken from him. A giant bug was floating next to him in the same manner. Cooler frowned slightly as he felt traces of his brother's ki on this being. The bug turned to him as he noticed that he was being stared at. The bug suddenly showed a mocking smile towards Cooler, which stunned him for a second. Why the fuck are you looking so smug? Do have a look in the mirror, you shitty bug. Cooler looked away from this bug, but he still continued to curse him in his head. He wouldn't say it out loud as it wouldn't be favorable to draw attention towards himself in this kind of situation. He closed his eyes and ignored the others for the rest of the flight. It took only a few minutes until the group arrived on a strange-looking planet. Cooler opened his eyes after noticing their intrusion into a different dimension. The atmosphere made him comfortable. They quickly landed and Cell and Cooler were freed of the energy. They heavily fell on the ground, and before they could reorganize themselves, Beerus spoke out again. All right, you two come at me. Let me see how strong you really are. Don't worry, I will be going easy on you. Humph. Let's see what you've got then. Cell sprung up and directly charged at Beerus to vent the frustration of the humiliation he experienced just now. In flight, Cell put 2 fingers on his forehead and suddenly disappeared from the spot, only to reemerge behind Beerus. He punched out. His fist heavily landed on the tip of Beerus' tail. Suddenly, the tail lashed out like a whip and smacked Cell in the face, sending him into the lake. Cooler finally came out of his daze and jumped into the air. He doesn't know why the god of destruction wanted to be attacked, but he didn't dare to delay his request. It was also a chance to get rid of his fear of this being. If he knew that Beerus wasn't as strong as his father had acclaimed, he might be able to achieve greater heights. In the air, Cooler put up both his arms and a giant sun was rapidly gathering above him. It took only a few moments until his attack was ready to be fired. Without considering the planet or anybody else, he swung his arms down, pointing them at Beerus. Supernova. The giant ball accelerated as it was thrown towards the god. Cell had jumped out of the lake and looked up at the giant energy sphere only to curse under his breath, "This maniac?" Beerus was evidently unimpressed as he looked at the supernova heading for him. He only raised his arm and pointed his hand towards the incoming attack. A small energy sphere shot out of Beerus' hand. It looked comical as the tiny sphere pushed back the supernova back to where it came from. Cooler quickly dodged his own attack and followed the supernova with his eyes as it exploded in the space outside of Beerus' planet. Cooler looked back towards Beerus, who was smirking slightly. If energy attacks won't work, how about this? A huge current of energy suddenly gushed out of him before it converged again, creating a golden glow on Cooler's skin. After a second, the exoskeleton of Cooler was now painted golden, and his confidence could be felt after transforming. "You can call me Golden Cooler." After listening to him, the people on the ground had an expression that said, "Really?" I see. I hope your naming sense isn't as bad as your capabilities, Beerus said with some anticipation. Cooler directly charged out after Beerus finished his sentence. In a blink of an eye, Cooler arrived in front of Beerus and punched out. Beerus held up his arm and easily blocked the attack with one hand. Cooler was stunned, but his expression instantly turned fierce as he continued his onslaught. Cell didn't wait till the fight was finished. While Cooler was engaging Beerus, he was charging up a Kamehameha. Beerus casually attacked after getting bored of blocking the attacks of Cooler. Cooler stood no chance against the speed of the god of destruction and was mercilessly beaten up. Just as Beerus kicked Cooler into the ground, Cell showed up in front of him and released his Kamehameha directly in Beerus' face. The attack lasted for a few seconds before it dissipated. Beerus only patted his clothes, looking unharmed. Cell's eyes widened and was directly knocked out by a quick strike against his chin. He dizzily fell to the ground, right next to the crater of Cooler. Beerus then blindly slashed out with his tail, destroying a Destructo disc that Cell had prepared before he charged up his Kamehameha. Really not bad. I didn't know that there were so many fine fighters in my universe. Beerus could easily tell their potential, especially the potential strength of Cooler's transformation. The only reason its strength was subpar to its potential was due to the lack of control of Cooler. If he could control it correctly, he would be able to contend to the weaker god of destructions. Still, right now, he was the strongest among the present group. The only thing lacking was his martial knowledge. His attack pattern was too crude. Cell, on the other hand, was unpredictable with his teleportation and his attacks. His martial knowledge was also up to par with his power. Still, he was barely as strong as the other Saiyans. Looking at Cooler, Whis' eyes had the same glint in his eyes when he first met Cell, but as before, he didn't show much reaction otherwise. Whis, what do you say? We train them for a week, and a day before the tournament start, we will choose the best among them. Whis asked with a raised eyebrow. Cough. Of course, I will take a look from time to time, Beerus said shamelessly and started to walk away. Sai, listen up. Whis raised his voice to garner the attention of those around him. The Z-fighters were already healed and had woken up just in time to see the fight between Cooler, Cell, and Beerus. After confirming that everyone was listening, Whis continued. A week isn't a lot of time. I could probably only extend our time to a few years. It would be the best if you give it your all. Otherwise, who knows if Beerus destroys you in dissatisfaction. Although Whis said this with an innocent smile on his face, the content of his speech didn't make anybody present, who had a sense of crisis, happy. Chapter 209. Freedom. Haha. Awesome. A tournament between universes, and we are being trained by someone who is friends with a god. Goku laughed out loud as he became excited of the prospect of meeting new powerful enemies. He was constantly growing more powerful. He has almost surpassed the strongest of Exausia, and now he learns that completely new enemies, which possibly far surpasses him in strength, will be his opponents. He couldn't help but be excited. Indeed, although I have only been the mentor of Lord Beerus for a very long time, I hope you will gain a lot out of this training. Maybe you will get even stronger than Lord Beerus. What? You are Beerus' mentor? Goku screamed out. Although he knew that Whis had to be strong as he could stand side to side with Beerus and didn't lose out of the danger he gave off, he wouldn't have imagined that Whis was in fact Beerus' mentor. He had high hopes for the training with Whis before, but now his expectations increased a whole lot. What are we doing first? Goku was eager to start, but Whis had other plans. Before we begin our training, you will have to know where you are going to live from here onwards. With that being said, Whis teleported the group into his staff, a room of time and space, very similar to the hyperbolic time chamber. He led them through some buildings that were built in the center of this giant room. He quickly showed them their rooms and where they could find food and other daily necessities. Afterwards, they walked to an open field. Whis looked at the 12 candidates for the tournament, of which 8 were Saiyans. One of them was a frost demon, a Namekian, a Hera, and a mix of multiple races. Whis then separated the group into groups of 4. The Exausians formed a team. Cooler, Bardock, and Jine formed another team, and Vegeta, Gohan, and Cell were assigned as the third team. The last team consisted of Piccolo, Goku, and Raditz. He then let 2 groups fight each other. Although he had seen the fight between them and Beerus and knew of their general capabilities, it would be better to have a look at a fight when the powers are somewhat the same. He wanted them to struggle with all their strength and bring out everything they got. Fortunately, Whis didn't need to motivate them, as everyone recognized the underlying threat of the statement Whis had made previously. If they didn't put any efforts into their training, they would probably die through Beerus' hands. Even Goku became exceptionally serious when it involved training and rising to a new level of strength. While they were fighting their hearts out with each other, Whis began to analyze their fighting style, strengths, weaknesses, and potential. From time to time, he could be seen nodding slightly as he assessed this group of fighters. He was impressed at how far these mortals got on their own. He couldn't help but smile in anticipation of how far these 12 warriors will go. Maybe one of them will be the future god of destruction. After the fight, he let this group rest for a while and started to check on Broly, who was still in the midst of training. Whis noticed that he grew even stronger, and that he should be able to endure robots of higher quality. After seeing Broly struggle anew, having no room for distraction, Whis' eyes flashed for a second. He then turned to look at Cell and Cooler. "Hey, want a drink?" Whis said to the group, while conjuring up a table with a lot of water bottles on it. Cooler and Cell approached the table, and suddenly they both got smacked on the head. They directly turned around to beat up anyone who dared to mess with them, only to see Whis with his staff resting on his shoulder. They immediately stopped with their actions. "Oh, sorry, I just saw a bug." Ho ho ho, Whis held a hand in front of his mouth as he turned around to leave. Cooler was confused for a second, after which he saw 2 bugs twitching on the ground. He didn't know why Whis had bothered with these insects, but he didn't want to ask either, so he just dropped it. Cell, on the other hand, was feeling frustrated for some reason. Although he saw the bugs on the ground as well, he couldn't help but feel personally attacked. Whis then went around and smacked some other people as he killed the bugs that came out of nowhere. Cooler turned around to get some water. After he opened the bottle and was about to drink, he froze. He lowered the bottle and looked at the back of his hand. He placed the bottle on the table and then observed his palm for a bit. He felt different. Cell beneath a tree could be seen doing the same. With Whis' weird abilities to manipulate space and his unique room of space and time inside his staff, he started an extended period of training. It was an extremely harsh training that brought all of the 12 warriors to the verge of breaking. Even the 3 Exausians, who underwent the training with Broly that always at least included several broken bones, could barely complete a full routine. However, every single one of them knew that after this training, each of them would be the very peak of power in this universe, and no one could stand against them. Of course, that only prescribed that Whis wouldn't train anyone else. A few months into the training, Cooler suddenly behaved strangely as he excused himself from training and started to meditate beneath a tree for days without a stop. It was like he was manically trying to achieve something. Cell started doing the same a few months later. He showed the same behavior, but it wasn't as excessively as Cooler. He still came to the basic training. Although Cell had started this behavior later, he stopped it before Cooler did. He also didn't want to reveal what he had been doing. At that point, he showed more goodwill towards Whis, which didn't seem to come from the fact that he was being trained by this angel. Cooler took a lot longer. A year in, and he finally stopped whatever he was doing. He too started to show more goodwill towards Whis. His attitude was exceedingly more different than it was with Cell, who was basically the same as before with only a little bit difference. Cooler got colder in his interactions with the Exausians, and even showed some hostility. No matter how the others asked them, they wouldn't reveal a single thing, which was true for Whis as well. He only mysteriously smiled but said nothing as a response. He only told them to ask the people who were affected. The Z fighters were clueless, but the Exausians were somewhat aware of what was going on. Their guesses were confirmed when they recalled that Whis had been increasingly checking up on Broly when the behaviors of the two changed. Although they knew what was going on, they couldn't do anything about it and refocused on their training. Whis was currently working on their base and said that if they met his requirements, he would show them how to reach a higher level. Something very different to the things they had done previously. He claimed that he would make them godlike beings. The group was excessively motivated by this. Whis underestimated their will for improvements and had to up his training by quite a bit to match their eagerness. While training, a total of 2 years passed for the group, and now it was time for the group to end their training. It was only a single day in the outside world until the tournament between the universes officially starts. Whis gathered them all and had them all fight it out in a free-for-all, which decided 4 of the contestants in the tournament. Cooler's and Cell's eyes flashed as they heard that one of the spots was already taken and that they had to fight for the remaining ones. They quickly fought it out and decided the 4 contestants. Some were in high spirits as they could enter the tournament while others could only sigh. They didn't know Beerus would view the others, whose strength wasn't on par with the contestants. Beerus was already waiting for the group to exit the staff. He was getting excited thinking about how strong these mortals that were personally trained by an angel would be. With a flash, the staff was suddenly grabbed by a person who happened to be Whis. Beerus looked at the 12 candidates. He only nodded deeply as he sensed the different vibe they were giving off. Beerus could sense the hidden sharpness of these warriors. Previously, he didn't really put them into his eyes, but now he had to reevaluate them, especially those that were leading the group. Chapter 210. I want Broly's head. Beerus observed the 12 warriors as he called out to Whis. So, have you decided on who is fit to be a contestant in this tournament? Beerus could faintly tell who was the strongest in the group, and could therefore guess who Whis had picked. He asked anyway as Whis had spent 2 whole years with them. He would know their weaknesses and strengths better than he could. Of course, through your guidance we both know which lineup would be the most beneficial to be chosen, Whis said sarcastically, causing Beerus' face to twitch slightly. For Beerus, it only had been 6 days since their training had begun. He knew that he said that he would take a look from time to time, but he had not done it once during the training. He thought it would be enough for his mentor to teach them. He wasn't a good teacher anyway. I have trust in you, Whis. I don't doubt that you would do a perfect job in training this bunch. Whis closed his eyes and shook his head slightly. Sigh. Thanks, Lord Beerus. Anyway, I think I should introduce you to the contestants of the tournament, those who would represent Universe 7. Whis raised his arm and beckoned for the 4 to step forwards. Here they are. The one with the most amount of raw power is the Frost Demon, Cooler. With his golden transformation, he rapidly closes in on the God tier level. His battle experience is subpar, but his strength easily compensates for this flaw. Beerus rubbed his chin while listening to Whis' introduction and tried to overlay it with the impression he got from 6 days ago, in the moment they came out of the staff. Second with the Saiyan called Son Goku. Although his strength is lesser compared to Cooler's, his battle experience and his fighting instincts make him even more dangerous in a fight than Cooler. Third is the Saiyan called Vegeta. Like Goku, his battle experience could be directly felt in a single exchange. He uses his martial skill and techniques to dominate in a fight. His strength is about the same as Goku's and in every right a dangerous foe. Last but not least is Zangya of the Hera race. Beerus raised his eyebrow as he heard the last name. From all the candidates, he wasn't sure who would be placed in the last spot for this tournament. He could tell that this Zangya was strong, not weaker than the others, but in his mind, she didn't outshine the others either. In fact, since they all were about the same, wouldn't it make more sense to place this bug called Cell as the last candidate? He could use the majority of the techniques that the others could without diminishing its effects. He would be a good surprise. Whis seemed to know his doubts and followed up with the reason why she was chosen instead of the others. She has a race innate ability called Psycho Threads, which can be used to seal and absorb the powers of her opponents. If one doesn't know of her ability, she would be impossible to beat for most. Even if they knew of this ability, it wouldn't help them much either. I see. Someone who could absorb the opponent's power is surely threatening, Beerus said while nodding. Aaliyah, Kana, and Gohan were a bit downcast as they weren't strong enough, even though they put so much effort into their training. Despite being downcast, they couldn't deny the gains they got through this training. Even if they weren't as strong as Goku and Vegeta, they weren't far off either. As for our last contestant, we will have to wait for him to come out. He already had his breakthrough after having a slight setback in midst training. He is only stabilizing his strength now. He will be out tomorrow to participate. Goku's ear twitched as he heard Whis talk about this mysterious last contestant. He immediately ran up to Whis to ask once again who their last teammate would be, but as before he was being denied with, "You will know when the tournament starts." Vegeta squinted slightly. He already guessed that Broly should be the last contestant. He was, after all, the strongest person he knew beside these present. Cooler visibly tensed up again as he listened to their conversation. Cell, on the other hand, was still seemingly relaxed as before, only his fist was slightly clenched. "All right, let's eat something," Whis said as he conjured up a giant table with several different meals on top. The meals were still warm. The Saiyans couldn't help but immediately start wolfing down everything they could see. Everyone else only shook their heads as they quietly took something for themselves before the table was emptied. Beerus and Whis slightly sat on the side and ate their fill. The food wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. It was a bit on the bland side, but to the Saiyans it didn't make much of a difference. They weren't picky choosers. Afterwards, Whis urged them to take a good night's rest and meet on the lakeside for departure in the morning. They were quickly being led to several buildings in the tree trunk. They talked for a bit before the 12 went asleep. In the middle of the night, 2 figures appeared outside of the buildings on an open field in the near forest. A purple figure with armor like white carapaces and a visor that covered his mouth was standing quietly in the middle of the clearing. His tail was waving slightly behind him. After a short while of waiting, another figure stepped out from between the trees. With his 2 long black wings and crossed arms, Cell stepped out of the shadow to meet Cooler in the clearing. They seemed to have discussed this before, as Cooler seemed to have waited for Cell to come. Cooler observed Cell for a second before he spoke out. "I will speak bluntly. I want to assassinate Broly." Cooler waited for a response, but nothing came back, so he just continued. "Broly will probably need to deal with the strongest of Universe 6. Afterwards he will be exhausted, and then we can dash." He suddenly was interrupted by Cell's laughing. "I see. Well, it was obvious after hearing what you had to do for them. You truly were a helpless puppet." Cooler got pissed as he looked at Cell's mocking face. He clenched his hand into a fist, ready to attack at any second, but he calmed himself down. "Aren't you the same? He had messed with your soul too and forced you to comply. Don't you have a grudge against him?" Cell smiled as if he thought that Cooler's agitation was bemusing. "Yeah, see, this is the difference between us. He didn't make me do anything. Well, not exactly, but he never forced me to do something that I wouldn't have done otherwise." "Humph. So? Only because he treated you good is reason enough for you to ignore that he messed with your soul? Pathetic. Aren't you simply afraid of him?" Cooler provoked him, and it worked like a charm as Cell's expression turned solemn. I never said that I won't get my revenge, but I won't be joining you." Cell raised a finger and waved it slowly from side to side. "No one is allowed to mess with me like he did, and he will pay for it, but not in a form of an assassination." I will beat him in a duel and prove once and for all that I am the prefect being. I don't care if you want to try your luck with Broly, but let me be clear about one thing. Don't you dare hurt the other Exausians, or else I will kill you myself. Cell's voice sounded out, and with it, killing intent spread into the surroundings. Cooler was stunned for a second. I don't care about them. I only want Broly's head. You should know that you won't be accepted by them if you place yourself against their beloved one. With that, Cooler disappeared into the night. He knew that there was no point in continuing trying to convince Cell to join him. In the last 2 years, Cooler had obviously seen that Cell and the 3 Exausians had a good relationship with each other. He had thought that Cell had faked it, so he could easier ambush Broly, but it seemed like he genuinely enjoyed their company. Cell stood there for a second. He then looked at the building that was housing them at the moment, before he sighed and headed back. After the two left, a figure with crossed arms leaning against a tree left as well. The two weren't aware that their conversation had an unwelcome listener. Chapter 211. The Last Contestant. In the early morning of the next day, a group of people have gathered at a lakeside on a weirdly shaped planet. 4 of these people could be seen stretching their bodies to warm up. These were the participants representing Universe 7 in the incoming tournament. Even Goku was up and awake. How could he otherwise? Usually he was quite the sleepyhead, but considering what would be happening today, he couldn't help but feel excited. He anticipated the chance to fight warriors of a different universe. But he and the other candidates weren't the only ones who will be joining this tournament. Jine had somehow managed to convince Beerus and Whis to pick their friends up so they could watch as well. After everyone was gathered, Beerus urged them into a big cube with see-through walls. This way Whis didn't need to focus and carry everyone individually, which was quite the hassle. The group, with Beerus included, quickly climbed inside. Whis jumped on top of it and quickly started flying towards their destination. The location was confirmed a few days prior, when Vados had created the arena on a barren planet that was floating around at the edge of the universe, only a short jump away to Universe 6. The planet wasn't situated in a solar system, but used to merely float around alone. That was obviously before the other Dragon Balls were placed around it. It would be quite hard to detect this planet, if it weren't for the fact that this planet was special, which was the reason why the tournament was chosen on it. This planet was actually the last Dragon Ball. Only the surface ground, which had been naturally formed, was preventing from anyone knowing this planet's true value. With Whis' flying abilities, it didn't take long for this group to arrive on the planet. They quickly landed on the only different thing that was on this barren red planet. It was a huge arena with several benches on the side, and similar to the series they complained about them. For the benefit of all, Whis had quickly conjured up 2 soft round resting area for each universe. Chi-Chi and Bulma had even brought some picnic stuff, and they all made themselves comfortable as if it was the most natural thing to do. Kappa was a bit speechless as how bold these mortals were, but like his brother, he didn't really care about it. He even thought that it was quite a refreshing reaction. The Kais of Universe 7 were absent as they have yet to know of the existence of their god of destruction. The Kais of Universe 6 thought it was odd as it was a rather important event. It was after all a tournament between universes, and it would be basic courtesy to be present. Since Universe 7's Kais weren't present, they could only remain on their resting hour, waiting for the tournament to start. Offside to the arena was a small area with several chairs, which seemed to be waiting for the contestants of Universe 7. There were already several people sitting on the chairs waiting for the written test to start. The 4 contestants climbed the stairs towards the even area with the chairs. After they had climbed the stairs, the 5 contestants of Universe 6 were revealed to them, and most of them appeared a lot more normal than they had anticipated. There were 2 girls who had a fierce aura around them. One of them in specific was putting a distinctive pressure on Vegeta and Goku. They immediately knew that these 2 girls were Saiyans. There wasn't much proof as they didn't have the iconic tail, but they still were convinced that they were Saiyans for sure. Although they were observing these 2, they didn't seem to notice at all or just didn't care. The 2 were currently staring daggers at another member of theirs. Their gaze revealed their killing intent, which made the whole atmosphere quite tense. These 2 were the current leaders of the Sadala, Kale, and Caulifla. The one they were looking at was none other than the legendary assassin, Hit. Their hostility could be seen with the naked eyes, and it seemed as if it was materializing in the air itself, but Hit wasn't fazed at all. He just sat there with crossed arms and closed eyes. Beside the 2 Saiyans and the assassin, a frost demon sat beside them with closed eyes as well. Goku and Vegeta were shocked when they saw him. Frieza! Goku blurted out. With the sudden exclamation, the frost demon seemed to wake up and looked over. Seeing that he was being observed, he only returned an amiable smile. He instantly left a good and friendly impression on the 2 Saiyans, which confused them greatly as they had associated him with the tyrant Frieza. The last contestant was a giant robot who had 2 round windows in his chest which revealed a magma-like substance inside it. After Team Beerus was sitting down, the 2 female Saiyans began to observe their opponents. Their expression showed their confidence, but when they saw Goku and Vegeta, they couldn't help but be startled. They could guess from what race they were, however, They quickly denied it in their heads as they didn't expect for Saiyans to appear in a completely different universe. Frost was also observing Cooler more closely as he could directly tell that Cooler was a frost demon as well. It wasn't hard to figure out, considering their race's characteristic appearance. However, Cooler still looked somewhat different than the usual frost demon. Frost immediately recognized it for what it was. Frost was astonished and excited at the same time, as this might give him some clues to the next level of transformation. They didn't have much impression on Zangya, beside her beautiful and delicate appearance. She didn't look much of a threat compared to the other members. Kappa obviously looked through the members of Beerus' team, and he directly realized something. "Oh, Beerus, did you forget one of your fighters, or is that all you could gather?" Kappa said in a sarcastic tone. However, his little remark didn't bring out the reaction he expected. Instead of becoming angry or embarrassed, Beerus smiled at Kappa in a mocking way. "Kappa, don't worry about my last warrior. He is already here. Whis, bring him out." Whis nodded at Beerus' order and raised his staff. He couldn't delay it anymore. Either ready or not, the tournament would start now, and he needed to participate in this test. The staff started glowing, gaining the attention of anyone present. With a blinding flash, a figure appeared and landed softly on the ground with one foot. The figure placed down his other foot and steadied himself. The light dimmed quickly and revealed a figure with a completely shredded pair of pants and sash. It was only able to cover the most important parts. His whole body was bloody, as if he had just taken a bath in blood. He looked like he was a demon that came out of a gruesome battle. Only 2 people knew that the blood that had dried on his skin was purely his own. Even Beerus was shocked by the appearance of his trump card called Broly, the king of Exausia and the strongest Saiyan alive. Beerus didn't know what this training was that Broly had to go through in Whis' staff. He had thought that he was just meditating in the special space with the God Key, but that wouldn't lead to someone being covered in his own blood. Whis quickly pointed his staff at Broly, sent out a stream of pure energy. It quickly washed away the dried blood and restored Broly's original clothes. The only modification Whis made to his clothes was to integrate his symbol on Broly's pants. After being cleaned, everyone was now able to tell who this person was. Team Beerus could finally confirm the identity of their last member. However, the celebration was only meager. The only one who seemed to be ecstatic about his appearance was Zangya. She was already jumping at him and throwing her arms around his neck. Cooler had a suppressed hostile expression, while Goku became solemn. Vegeta only glanced at Broly from the corner of his eyes. The 3 already had their suspicion that it would be Broly, but now that it was confirmed, they didn't know if they should be happy that they were right. The contestants of Universe 6 had an even more exaggerated reaction. The assassin had his eyes wide open as he glared at Broly, who not only was fine but was oozing with power. He was shocked. He couldn't understand that his target had survived. No, he had escaped right in front of his nose. Not only that, he was in fact someone of another universe. Hit clenched his fist. This severely affected his pride as an assassin. He had never missed his target involuntarily, not once in his 1,000 years of life. Yet now a target was alive and well right in front of his eyes. Chapter 212, 3 Kittens. Next to Hit were Kale and Caulifla, who had their mouths wide open as if they had seen a ghost. They were as shocked as Hit to see Broly in a place like this. They had already taken it upon themselves to avenge his death by murdering Hit, but who of these 3 would have guessed that Broly was still alive? Additionally, he was announced as a contestant of Universe 7, which would mean that they would have to fight him if they wanted to win. How could this be? Kale mumbled as she looked at Broly without blinking. After calming down from the shock, her body was filled with a warm sensation. Although confused, she was happy that he was still alive. She abruptly stood up, almost throwing her chair to the ground. She quickly ran up to him and waited for a second until Zangya finally let go of him. She then gave him a hug to Broly's waist as tears appeared on her face. Broly looked down at the seemingly frail girl. He patted her head to calm her down. Caulifla approached him as well and lightly punched his upper arm. While tearing up herself, Broly sighed slightly before pulling Caulifla into the embrace. She was a bit startled but didn't resist in the end. They stayed like this for a while before they separated again. "You asshole. Could have told us that you were still alive." Caulifla shouted as she crossed her arms, trying her best to look angry, but she couldn't hide the smile that had creeped into her face. Kale, on the other hand, nodded heavily as her body was giving off a dangerous vibe. "Yes. Next time we hear that you die, we will kill you." Broly only smiled helplessly, hearing this. "Shouldn't have believed some rumors. As if I would die that easily." Tisage. Broly turned his head and looked at Hit, who was gritting his teeth. However, his face quickly relaxed again after showing his dissatisfaction. Hit returned Broly's gaze as if to say that he would settle the score today. "All right. We will catch up later, after we are done with whatever we are supposed to be doing." Broly glanced at the deities that were floating above their head. The Super Dragon Balls around this planet wasn't easily overseen either. He already knew that the tournament would start now as opposed to a few years in the future, which in turn would mean that the Tournament of Power would start sooner as well. He now had to pretend that he didn't know what was going on. Otherwise, he would have already laughed out in anticipation. Soon he will meet the forces of the Dragon Ball multiverse. But now he had to pacify the three beasts that were glaring at his back. He turned around and saw his wives glaring at him. They were silent during the reunion between him and his disciples, but they didn't seem that they would remain silent. As if that thought had triggered something from these three lionesses, they approached him with Aaliyah in the front with a smile that didn't reach her eyes on her face. "Hey Broly, long time no see." The icy tone in her voice sent shivers down the people's spine. Even Kampa, who was about to hurry them, froze before coughing and pretending to think about something else. Zangya behind her showed her support, even though she seemed more indifferent. Kana, on the other hand, had an evil smile on her face. "Would you mind introducing these children to us?" Aaliyah said as she pointed at Kale and Caulifla with her chin. "Sure. This is Caulifla and Kale. I trained them when I was in Universe 6. Broly pushed the two girls slightly forward as he introduced them to his wives. It seemed like they were fearful of Aaliyah, but after getting some reassurance from Broly, they politely greeted Aaliyah and the rest. Aaliyah approached the two with quick step, looking like she was about to pounce at them. "So, you two think dash?" Smack. Aaliyah's head lightly swung backwards and a red mark appeared on her forehead. "Ow wow." She crouched down and held her forehead with teary eyes. She glared at Broly, who flicked her forehead with his finger. He shook his finger. "Show some manners," Broly said with stern tone. His wives couldn't believe and were monetarily stunned. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. "Are you seriously jealous? Or do you fear that I would start an affair with these two?" Aaliyah was confused and begrudgingly nodded her head. Zangya added from the side to confirm the possibility. "You started an affair with me." Broly rolled his eyes. It has been a few years since he would bang any hot female without restraint, but after being with these three, it had made him want to settle down. "Yeah, and it has been quite some time since we last saw each other." Kana fueled the flames. "Do you think I would just take the next best woman and lay the bed with her?" Broly shook his head slightly as if he was greatly hurt by their assumptions before he seemingly came to a revelation. "I see. So, you fear that your female charm isn't enough to keep me at bay? That you are less attractive than these two brats?" Broly asked with a raised eyebrow. "Tell me, would they be able to steal me from you?" This caused them to take a closer look at Kale and Caulifla before looking at their own assets. Aaliyah sprung up with a happy smile and jumped at Broly to give him a hug. "No threat at all," she said happily. "Hey, what is that supposed to dash?" Caulifla angrily shouted before she was quickly shot down by another glare of Aaliyah. Kale, on the other hand, had a blank face. No one knew what she was thinking. Broly couldn't help but to think that he should probably spend more time at home with his family and friends. Broly's little reunion with his wives ended in a group hug. Seeing that, Kampa coughed loudly and urged them to sit down. Was quickly approached Broly and explained the current situation. Broly had already guessed it and therefore wasn't surprised. He also glanced at the two gods before he looked into the sky at the Super Dragon Balls. All of them were gathered, which would mean that the leader of the Universal Intelligence was already taken care of. The 10 contestants sat down and received the tests. It was a very basic one, and even a child could solve it. The contestants had no problem completing and passing it. They then returned towards the contestants' area of their respective universe, facing each other. Located between the two sides was the arena with an announcer on it. While Broly listened to the announcer, he could hear the chatter of the spectators on his side. It was mostly complaining coming from Chi-Chi and Bulma about him having more than one wife, while Master Roshi and Yamcha were silently praising him as a hero. When these two saw him look over, they even gave him a thumbs up. Broly was stunned for a second due to this reaction. Shouldn't he be seen as their mortal enemy? His threat of him destroying the world was still standing. He even saw Krillin subconsciously wanting to join in on the praise, but was quickly put into place by his girlfriend number 18. Even though Broly had changed the history a little bit, they still got together. Broly didn't bother with them anymore and inspected Hit for a second. Hit wasn't as leisurely as he was in the series. His eyes were open, and his gaze was focused on Broly. Broly could tell that he was eager to once again fight and defeat him. Only this way he could wash away his shame. Broly could tell that he got a lot stronger after their little bout. He was getting excited seeing Hit's strength. To see the improvement of his disciples would be nice as well, however. He doubted that these two Saiyans could bulldoze through his entire team to get to him. Broly inspected Cooler, who was glaring at him like Hit did. When he was training in Whis staff, he noticed that both his soul connection to Cell and Cooler were severed. This didn't really affect him in any way, but it was still frustrating to know that his control was being released. He also was sure that only few could do something like this, which obviously included the deities, especially Whis, who had given him a meaningful look after he came out. When Broly looked at Cell, who came as a spectator, he didn't see the same hatred as he did in Cooler. However, his eyes were filled with determination. After the introduction of the rules ended, Broly spoke out in order to add a rule. He had asked them to create a barrier in the air around the arena, so one couldn't just fly into outer space and have their duel there. They quickly agreed to his request, and was quickly created a strong barrier. Now the announcer started to introduce the fighters of the first round. Chapter 213, First Fight. The martial art matches between fighters, selected by the gods of destruction from Universe 6 and 7, will now commence. Now then, let us all sing the universal anthem. The light dimmed with the exception of one that pointed in the middle of the arena where a singer stood. Orchestra starts playing. The singer took a deep breath to start singing. The universe is really vast. The light brightened again, and the music stopped. The gods didn't seem flustered at all. Only the mortals were perplexed. Was that it? One sentence? They were dumbfounded and looked around to see if anybody else thought this was weird. Thank you very much. Now it is time for the first match. The first competitors are... The presenter pointed at a floating marble oval board, which depicted the 10 fighters of these two universes. From Universe 6, contestant Frost. From Universe 7, Vegeta will be stepping into the ring. As soon the presenter's voice fell, the two fighters jumped onto the arena. They stood opposite each other and had a short stare down. Suddenly Frost spoke out with a smile. Good day. Frost approached Vegeta and extended his arm to greet Vegeta, but Vegeta didn't have any of it. He only wordlessly stared at him with crossed arms. Seeing Vegeta being unresponsive, Frost's smile twitched slightly. Well, understandable. We are all a bit tense right now. He then walked past Vegeta and approached Universe 7 spectator area and started speaking to them. Ladies and gentlemen from Universe 7, it's unfortunate that we find ourselves divided into allies and enemies in this manner, but this is no more than a competition. I believe that afterwards, we will all be able to shake hands and say that this was a pleasant meeting. If you would, please enjoy our fight. Thank you for your attention. Frost bowed slightly before walking opposite of Vegeta again. Vegeta was a bit surprised at this different demeanor compared to Frieza, but he guessed that there still was a problem with this Frost demon. How, you may ask? Through the two Saiyans of Universe 6 that sneered and had an expression of disgust when looking at Frost while he was holding his speech. Maybe in Universe 6 this Frost and the Saiyans had a conflict with each other as well, and due to that Frost was an enemy to the Prince of all Saiyans as well. The two faced each other, and with a key blast of Kampa that hit a giant gong, the first match started. Frost cracked his neck and then dashed towards Vegeta. Vegeta was cautious and directly noticed that Frost tried to jump above him. Vegeta leaned backwards, put his hands on the ground and kicked upwards. Frost was surprised at the quick reaction and hurriedly blocked the kick midair. His body shot into the air. Frost quickly stopped himself before he flew into the barrier, which would be out of bounds and his loss. Just as he stopped, a purple blinding light got brighter from the ground. Frost watched as a light beam headed his way. He looked at the barrier behind him, and even though he could have blocked it in his assault form, he wasn't sure if it was now enough to prevent him from being disqualified. Without holding back, he transformed into his final form. The blinding light of his transformation withstood, and even pushed away the Gallic gun from Vegeta. Vegeta stopped his attack and looked at Frost, who appeared in his final form. Humph. Finally done playing around? Vegeta asked as his hair turned golden and high amount of ki gushed out of him. The concentration created lightning that flowed around his body. From the energy Frost had leaked, Vegeta knew that this Frost demon was far stronger than Frieza back then. Frost didn't seem to be surprised as he looked at the transformation, and neither were the other members of Universe 6. Frost had hoped that the Saiyans of Universe 7 were inferior to the ones in his, but after seeing that the mentor of his biggest eyesores was a Saiyan from Universe 7, he had already suspected their overwhelming strength. It's as difficult for me to control my power in my final form. For this reason, I once accidentally took the life of an evildoer whom there was no need to kill. Ever since then, I have kept my final form sealed up, but I suppose you will be able to handle this form. Humph. Enough talking. Vegeta motioned Frost to come at him with a battle-lusting smile on his face emerged. Bring it on. I hope you won't regret it. Frost shouted out and once again dashed towards Vegeta. This time, however, his speed was far superior to before. His body seemed to teleport from side to side as he approached Vegeta. This is my full power. With a scream, Frost punched out. Vegeta swayed to the side a bit before abruptly spinning around. He evaded the punch and directly counterattacked with a tornado kick. Frost, stunned that his attack missed, was directly kicked in the face. His body skidded along the ground of the arena before he found his footing again. The arena underneath his feet released a bit of white smoke as he stopped his body from advancing. Frost didn't let himself be distracted and headed into battle once more. This time Frost kept up his cautiousness and fought it out with Vegeta. Broly looked at the battle with obvious interest. So, you were lucky enough to get trained by Whis. He casually said out loud. Goku turned towards Broly. Indeed, we are far stronger than we used to be. Oh, do you mean Super Saiyan 3? Of course, Which would have helped you achieve that form. Goku wasn't surprised that Broly knew of Super Saiyan 3. He nodded at Broly's response. Yes, this transformation is exceedingly strong. However, Vegeta still needs to reserve his strength for the next battles. With that, Goku turned to watch the battle again. Broly smiled slightly as he looked at Vegeta's fighting style. Although he was surprised at their increase in their base strength and their acquiring of new transformations, that wasn't what intrigued him in this battle. Vegeta was being suppressed in raw power and speed, but his martial skill easily closed the gap and gave him the advantage. He used frost power against himself and was able to increase his damage. It was obvious that Vegeta's style was being tailored towards stronger opponents and exploiting their inadept martial skill. It was rather inappropriate against Frost as his martial skill wasn't bad. However, Vegeta was still far superior and therefore manhandled Frost like he was a display model. Vegeta even looked at Broly when he pushed Frost to the ground, as if to say he would do the same to him. In other words, Vegeta had trained to fight against Broly. Of course, Vegeta didn't know that Broly wasn't just using raw power to overwhelm his opponents. He only fought this way to mess with the Z fighters back then. Vegeta tilted his head as he evaded a punch and turned around. He grasped Frost's arm and swung him towards the edge of the arena. He immediately followed up with several key blasts that sent Frost out of the ring. Vegeta hadn't taken a single hit while he was beating up Frost in close combat. Frost's poison needle that he had implanted couldn't show its effects against Vegeta. The match is over. He's out of bounds. Contestant Vegeta from Universe 7 wins. The spectators of Universe 7 cheered for Vegeta. Broly clapped with an amused smile on his face as he looked at Vegeta. Go Vegeta! I believe in you. Defeat them all. Ah! Broly sarcastically shouted out, which earned him quite some menacing stares. He didn't bother with them and continued his cheering. The picture on the oval board of Frost dimmed to show his loss. Moving on, the next fighter from Universe 6 to face contestant Vegeta is contestant Caulifla. The line connecting the pictures of these two lit up. Caulifla jumped onto the arena while rotating her shoulder. She had a fierce smile on her face as she looked at Vegeta. I hope you can give me a good warm-up, she said while starting some light stretches. Humph, I will beat you into a bloody pulp, you little brat. Vegeta was mad and fired up after Broly's mockery, even more so when Broly started cheering for Caulifla. Go my disciple, show him the strength of a real Saiyan. I want to see your face after I knocked out your disciple. Vegeta's face darkened as he heard Broly's shouts. The spectators yelled traitor at Broly. Even Beerus' face was twitching as he heard one of his contestants cheer for the other side. But before he could say something, Broly stopped. Beerus took a deep breath before speaking out in a deep, threatening voice. Remember, which god you are fighting for. Broly only gave a nod, still with a slight smile on his face. Beerus didn't bother with him anymore and shot a key blast at the gong that announced the second fight of the tournament. Chapter 2:14, Vegeta's Pride. Vegeta took in his battle stance. He became serious against Caulifla. Although he could handle the fact that he lost against Broly, he wouldn't accept defeat against Broly's disciple of less of a year. He would beat up this little shit no matter the cost. Caulifla became serious as well, but like Vegeta, she decided to first engage in her base form. It was like a natural law that compelled Saiyans to test their opponents one transformation at a time. This time Vegeta took the initiative and released a volley of energy blasts. Seeing this, Caulifla stood her ground and slapped away the blasts with her hands. Tisich. Vegeta stopped targeting her body and aimed at the ground around her instead. The blasts immediately created a smokescreen, obscuring everyone's sight. Vegeta directly followed up by jumping into the air and gathering energy above his head in both his hands. The energy ball quickly reached the size of a truck before Vegeta hurriedly threw it directly into the smokescreen. The following explosion engulfed almost half of the entire arena. However, a figure apparently unharmed flew through the explosion and headed towards Vegeta. Caulifla had a smirk on her face, as if to say that these attacks were nothing to her. Vegeta only snorted as he raised up his palm. Caulifla squinted her eyes as she anticipated a key attack. Ah! Vegeta gave a short shout as a formless push extended from his palm. Not being able to see the attack, Caulifla received the full brunt. Fortunately for her, this attack was just enough to put a stop to her approach, which was exactly what Vegeta was going for. He used the momentarily pause to directly punch her into the ground. She crashed into the arena in full speed, creating yet another smokescreen, which was quickly dispersed due to a golden aura. Was that all you got, Grandpa? Caulifla shouted as she dusted herself off. Vegeta's vein almost popped as he heard this. Without hesitation, he too turned into a Super Saiyan as well. They flew at each other and met in the middle with a loud bang, pushing both backwards. The shockwave pushed all the ruble on the arena out of bounds. Their figures flashed all over the place as they engaged in a fierce battle. The arena was destroyed bit by bit with every clash. It took them a while before they raised the battle to the next level. Ascended Super Saiyan. Caulifla's aura was by no means less than Vegeta's. Both showed that they had reached the peak of the transformation. However, Vegeta's power was more in-depth. It was evidently because he already achieved Super Saiyan 3, unlike Caulifla. His advantage came with his control over his Saiyan power. Of course, his martial skill was something that only few could match, even less Caulifla, who played a punk for the majority of her life. She was dominated by Vegeta, who was much more skilled than her. Vegeta was beating her up left and right, however. Her cheeky and smug remarks remained. After a while, Vegeta knocked her out and therefore concluding the second fight. Vegeta undid his transformation and steadied his breath as he waited for the presenter to announce the next fighter. He didn't have to wait long. As soon as Caulifla's defeat was announced, Kale jumped towards Caulifla and carried her to the contestant area. She asked Vados to heal her and then jumped into the ring, completely ignoring Campa's tantrum he threw and the threats he gave out. Whis had barely any time to repair the arena. Kale inhaled large amount of air with every breath. It was like she was doing her best to restrain herself. The presenter was shocked and quickly announced their fight. As soon as his voice fell, Kale unleashed a frightening amount of ki like an open dam. The ground beneath her feet crushed under the pressure she emitted. Her body released a green glow as her body and her muscles grew a few centimeters. It wasn't to the degree of her initial berserker mode, as it remained much more balanced. She now looked like the athletic warrior that she is. Ki was swirling around her body with lightning in between. This was evidently her strongest form, ascended legendary Super Saiyan. Broly shook his head with a smile as he thought, even legendary Super Saiyans have to hold up Saiyan battle courtesies. The audience was shocked at the transformation, especially the Earthlings. They thought that Broly would be the only one that could use this kind of form. After all, every Saiyan beside Broly used the Golden Super Saiyan form. They had only seen it once when Broly had engaged those future demon magicians, but now there was another one. Broly's wives were surprised as well, and immediately came to a realization as to why he had taken in these two Saiyans. They could see in the fight between Vegeta and Caulifla that she was yet another prodigy, and with Kale as a legendary Super Saiyan, they saw their future potential. They were once again surprised as to how Broly was able to identify prodigies. He had always talked that Vegeta and Goku were prodigies and low, and behold, they already exceeded them in strength, even though they had achieved Super Saiyan much later in life. Now he announced that he had two disciples that looked barely 15, of which one could already engage Vegeta in a fight. True, Caulifla only pushed Vegeta to an ascended Super Saiyan and was then treated as a punching bag because of her lack of martial skill, but this was feat that couldn't be underestimated. Vegeta, as well as all the other contestants, were the peak of Universe 7. It wouldn't get much stronger than those. Now the other disciple revealed herself as the same kind as Broly. Vegeta didn't hold back any longer and directly turned Super Saiyan 3. Broly's eyes were glistering as he looked at this rarely seen transformation of Vegeta. Oh, how they grow up, Broly said to Goku, who was frowning as he looked at the battle. Kale only dashed towards him after he had transformed. It seemed like she didn't want to beat him sneakily, or was it just another Saiyan battle courtesy? Either way, as soon as Vegeta was prepared, Kale made her move. She directly appeared in front of him. Her speed was unparalleled from what was seen before in this tournament. Even Vegeta in his current strongest transformation had a hard time following her rush towards him. He hurriedly raised his arms as he blocked the incoming punch. Crack. Vegeta slid over the ground. Only after he stopped it he lowered his arms. One of his arms was now limply hanging on his side. In a single punch his arm became useless. Kale wasn't following up with anything as she coldly looked at Vegeta. Vegeta gritted his teeth. He knew that although he is most likely superior to her in terms of martial skill, he wouldn't necessarily be able to cross this gap. There was a limit to which skill could help one defeat another. It would only take the opponent to be twice as strong or fast to put immense pressure on the martial artist. However, all of this didn't matter in a fight. One could only advance or admit defeat. I am the prince of all Saiyans. I won't lose against you. Vegeta stomped the ground and accelerated to his fastest and beyond. Kale was surprised but quickly regained her composure as she caught the powerful punch of Vegeta. She slid backwards as Vegeta pushed on. He then redirected his energy downwards, causing her to lean forward. He directly abused the gap in the defense and kneed her in the face. Kale was thrown back and skidded over the ground before doing a flip and landing on her feet again. She couldn't rest as Vegeta followed up with a flying kick. She was already with her back to the boundary. One step further, and she would be disqualified. Vegeta knew if the kick connected, he would win this fight. He looked at her face, but instead of the panic that he had thought he would see was only a sneer to find. She opened her mouth and ki rapidly gathered in her mouth. Before Vegeta was able to reach Kale or dodge, she released her attack. The created explosion covered the entire arena. However, the fight wasn't over. Booming sounds rang out in the smoke. No one was able to see what was happening, but one could imagine the beating that was happening in there. Only after the site was cleared were the audience able to see base Vegeta being held up by the hair. In the next moment, Kale threw Vegeta out of bounds. Just as the fight seemed over, Vegeta put up a final struggle. His body glowed vigorously with a golden hue as he once again entered Super Saiyan. Unfortunately, Kale seemed to have anticipated this and appeared directly above Vegeta. Vegeta gritted his teeth as he held up his arms in a futile attempt to block the attack. Like everyone expected, Vegeta's efforts were in vain as he heavily crashed into the ground outside of the arena. Chapter 215. Goku vs. Kale. Kale waited on the stage for her next opponent. She had already undone her transformation before Vados had repaired the arena. Afterwards, they had to decide who would go on the stage next from Universe 7. After seeing Kale's prowess, Goku was immediately excited and shouted out that he wanted to have a go. He directly jumped into the ring. However, Kale's focus wasn't on him. She stared into Universe 7's contestant area only to see an imposing figure staring coldly at her. They interlocked glares. Kale immediately noticed the hostility in this man's eyes. The tail behind the figure was slowly moving from side to side. It looked like a snake that was about to pounce at its prey. The red eyes seemed to glow as Cooler stared at Broly's disciple. As soon as he saw Kale's transformation, he wanted to step in and have a go himself. He wanted to drag their fight out as he broke every single bone in her body. However, he knew that it wasn't a smart move now. He would use up more strength with every additional fight he had, and he needed his stamina for the moment Broly was exhausted after he finished his fight. In fact, he had also wanted to beat up Caulifla, but she was too weak to stand up against Vegeta and was quickly disqualified. He still enjoyed her being beaten up though. Kale ignored him as he wasn't her opponent. She looked at Goku, who had a big smile on his face. It wasn't like he stepped in to fight her at all. Hey, great fight. You really look like Broly. Is he like your father? Broly almost stumbled at what he just heard. He shook his head helplessly. Maybe they didn't know due to Saiyan's unusual growth, but he was in his 20s. How old would he need to be to have a kid that was 14? What?
No.
He is my mentor. Kale said, flustered as well. What? So, there are like more of you out there? Kale was slightly irritated and didn't answer him. He didn't seem to care and started to jump up and down to warm himself up. He did some stretches and rotated his shoulders before finally going into his stance. The gong has already been rung. Never mind then, let's fight. Goku now said with a solemn expression. Kale looked at him before going into her stance as well. It was the one she had copied from Broly, with her arms pointing to the side on the ground while having one foot in front of her other. Goku's eyes squinted slightly and then abruptly dashed towards Kale. He quickly arrived slightly above her before he did front flip kick. Kale put up both her arms and blocked the kick from above. Her legs slightly bent as her feet slightly pierced into the ground. She straightened her body again and pushed Goku's leg away with her arms. Goku used the momentum from her push and did a backflip, directly following up with another kick. Kale hurriedly used her hand to push his kick to the side. Before she could counterattack, a punch followed. This went on for a couple of rounds with Goku on the offensive and Kale trying her best to not take any damage. Kappa was already screaming for Kale to transform, but she stayed in her base as she fought Goku. After a few minutes, Goku distanced himself. Thanks for the warm-up. Alright, let's raise it up a notch. With a short shout, he transformed into an ascended Super Saiyan. He was clear that he would otherwise stand no chance against her normal Super Saiyan form. The corners of Kale's lips curled upwards as he transformed into her legendary state. However, instead of her initial Berserker form, she only grew slightly taller, not even as much as her ascended legendary state. Broly squinted slightly as he looked at her transformation. He knew that their legendary states were a bit different, so this wasn't really a surprise to him as it was for his wives, and for those with the knowledge about his transformation. He could tell that she had no problem controlling her ki and therefore didn't grow as tall as she would have. Her body also seemed naturally more adept in handling her energy than Broly's. So, that the increased ki in her body only expanded her size a little. In her ascended state, she would grow even more as her ki output is way larger, but it would not grow to the extent that she had to fear of becoming a huge monster or even exploding. With Super Saiyan 3, she would probably barely reach 2 meters. It was the exact opposite of Broly's transformation. She didn't have to compact the energy to break through. Goku in his ascended state was almost as strong as Kale, and with his experience he could even create a gap in his favor between them. They fought each other until they rose the level another time. Goku as a Super Saiyan 3 against Kale in her ascended state. Goku and Vegeta were on the same scale of strength, so Goku too had problems keeping up with Kale's power. He knew that he would stand no chance against her in close combat. He put a finger on his forehead and suddenly disappeared from Kale's sight.
Bang!
She heavily fell on her side, sliding across the ground. She had only noticed a blurry shadow hit her from the corner of her eyes. She quickly stood up again and searched for Goku all over the place, but she couldn't find him until she heard the scream. Haria-me! She saw him glow in a golden and blue hue as ki gathered in his hands. Suddenly he disappeared and Kale heard a teeth gritting close to her. She looked down again. only to see Goku's whole body being tense as veins all over were bulging. He had cupped a blue sphere in his hands to the side of his body as he looked at Kale with a piercing gaze. Ha-iya! He thrusted out his hands towards the shocked Kale. The ki wave coming out instantly engulfed her whole body. The beam extended out as it heavily hit the barrier created by Whis. This went on for a few seconds before Goku couldn't keep it up any longer. He dropped his arms. Ha ha ha. Goku was grasping for air as he looked at the dispersing smoke. Disbelief appeared in his eyes as he looked at the figure in front. Unbelievable. This was a full power Kamehameha. Kale's whole body was slightly burnt, especially her lower arms, which give off a bit of smoke. She had put up her arms to cover her head as she had no time to dodge that attack. She slowly lowered her crossed arms and then waved her hand. A green sphere shot out and carried Goku into the air before exploding. He was exhausted through his attack just now and had no way to defend. He limply fell to the ground as smoke came from his whole body. Universe 7 spectators were screaming Goku's name. Goku reacted to her shouts, but before he could stand up again, Kale kicked him heavily into his sides, sending him out of bounds. Maybe if he wasn't fighting against Kale or someone else, who wasn't decisive, he could have taken his time to get up again. But as Broly taught her, she finished and secured her victory in the slightest moment of notice. Although Broly liked a challenge against someone who can threaten his life or those that he cared for, he would show no hesitation or playfulness anymore. It was also unnecessary to teach her how to drag things out in a natural way, as it seemed to be a Saiyan instinct either way. She won yet again and Kampa was thrilled. Both sides had the same number of fighters left, however Kale was already exhausted and hurt. Although she had raised a key barrier in the last moment, there wasn't enough time to come out unscathed. Fortunately, her body was more than tough. Cooler's eyes flashed once again as he was tempted to jump in. Before he could give in to the impulse, Zangya jumped into the ring. Goku was immediately healed like the other contestants, so he too could watch the next fights. As soon as the gong sounded out, Zangya stretched out her arms with her fingers spread. Kale waited for the attack to come but nothing happened. Huh? What is she doing? Kampa exclaimed. Beerus squinted as he looked at Zangya's hands. He knew about her abilities, but was surprised how difficult it was to detect it. Vados raised her eyebrows before saying, "Oh my. I thought she would advance further. Seems like her winning streaks end here." Vados shook her head slightly in disappointment. Kampa turned towards her. What do you mean? An almost invisible attack? Kale, on the other hand, was oblivious to her imminent defeat. She didn't wait any longer and stomped the ground to propel her towards Zangya. However, she directly stopped a meter away from her initial position. She felt as if she had just jumped into a spider web. She could feel the threads on her limbs, but she couldn't see any. Suddenly, she felt that her energy was leaving her. In panic, she directly advanced into her ascended state. With a quick burst, some threads looked like they caught fire. However, there were too many of them and more threads were entangling her. The light her ki gave off quickly dimmed as her energy was being drained and sealed away. Her eyelids became heavy as she became increasingly tired from the loss of her energy. Zangya waited for a second before confirming Kale's status before flinging her towards the boundary. Kale crashed into the edge of the arena before she heavily landed on the ground outside. Oops, Zangya said with an indifferent expression. Chapter 216. Zangya vs. Magetta. After Zangya's and Kale's fight, the arena was still fine as there wasn't a grand battle between the two. Kale couldn't do anything as she was entangled by numerous threads. The moment she stood put after Zangya stretched out her arms, she was doomed. Now there were only 2 contestants of Universe 6 left. Kampa was sulking and complaining, trying to disqualify Zangya, but they were just empty words. The presenter perfectly judged them according to the rules they had previously established. Zangya waited for her next opponent, and as expected the next one was Oda Magetta, a metal man who were susceptible towards insults. Of course, the only ones who knew this were the Angels and Broly. However, no one had the intention of telling the other contestants of this obvious flaw. Broly only wanted to watch an exciting and fair fight. Oda Magetta jumped into the ring and shook the ground with his heavy body. He looked incredible tough with his tall figure and the lava-like substance glowing in his chest. As soon as the gong sounded out, Magetta jumped into action and released a fury of punches. It seemed like his close combat style consisted solely of punches as he never used his heavy legs for kicks. Maybe since his whole body consisted of metal it became unnecessary or more difficult to use his legs instead of his arms. Anyhow, one couldn't play down his speed. Since his punches were the only things he used in close combat, he seemed to have considerable confidence in it. His speed was obvious trained to an incredible height, especially considering his huge size. The power of each swing wasn't to be underestimated as well. His whole body consisted of heavy metal, and therefore each strike would be heavy, too. Zangya, still in her base, had some difficulties, but still was able to evade every attack. Suddenly, she raised up and heavily assaulted Magetta's head with a variation of kicks and punches. Magetta didn't even take a step backwards from the heavy attacks and was taking them head-on. Zangya jumped back and looked on as Magetta shook his head slightly. Magetta's energy inside seemed to boil and burn, and steam came out of the steam pipe on his head. He charged at Zangya with greater speed and power. Zangya was surprised at the sudden increase in power and was almost overwhelmed. She was barely able to block a punch that knocked her back a couple of meters. Her arms were tingling. She knew that she was no match in power. Without holding back anymore, she transformed. Kappa couldn't help but curse as he felt the increase in power. They once again were evenly matched in power. Suddenly, she revealed a smirk and pulled her arms to her chest. Her hands looked like she was holding something. Suddenly, Magetta's leg snapped together as he was charging towards Zangya. He tripped and slid with his face across the arena. This was a new variation of the Psycho Threads. Although its initial sealing and absorbing properties are almost zero, the threads were incredibly tough, which made them appear as if they were made out of metal. From the beginning, she already knew that her normal threads wouldn't do jack shit. The energy in Magetta wasn't used by the exterior of his body, and threads couldn't penetrate deep enough to absorb or seal power through such a material. Maybe she could by targeting the thinner parts of Magetta's body, but the abilities of her threads would be too weakened to be significant. She already fought against a variety of beings in Universe 7. This wasn't the first time she fought a being made out of metal. Zangya pulled the threads and tried to swing Magetta out of the ring, but suddenly Magetta attacked the ground with a fire breath. His attack instantly turned the ground into lava, but also burnt down the threads. Now able to move, Magetta started firing his breath at Zangya, who directly dodged. She squinted her eyes as she observed his moves. Magetta followed her with his fire/lava breath. The smoke created from his fire breath was blocking the view for the audience, but more importantly of himself. He felt happy as Zangya appeared to have failed to dodge his attack. Suddenly, she appeared above him with her hands glowing brightly in a green hue. Goodbye, sunshine.
Instant blast.
In a burst, her energy peaked as she fired her attack at Magetta at close range. The attack's power was immense and only lasted for an instant before it disappeared without a trace. Well, not exactly without a trace, as the arena around Magetta's original position was pulverized. Almost half of the arena had disappeared. It wasn't weird to see the arena crumble beneath the attacks of these mighty warriors, even if they used one of the toughest materials of both universes. Magetta himself was leaning collapsed against the barrier. Kappa was almost pulling off his ears as he saw yet another warrior beaten. However, he quickly shot a glance at Hit. You have to win. Kappa growled, making his contestants shiver in fear. Hit furrowed his brows as he wasn't sure about his winning chances. Zangya might not be a problem, but he felt that this cooler should be troublesome, and then there was Broly. He had given his all last time and barely achieved victory. Now Broly seemed even stronger than back then. He wasn't sure of his victory as he was in the beginning. Either way, he didn't have much of a choice. Now, has he? He jumped onto the repaired arena and calmly looked at Zangya. He already heard that this woman was Broly's wife, and she herself was a powerhouse not to be underestimated. Her threads, if they hit him, could become a serious problem. So, from the start, he didn't underestimate her, even if she looked incredibly weak at the moment. That last attack of her used a substantial amount of her power and released it in a single instant to cause an incredible destructive attack. Of course, she was severely exhausted afterwards. She steadied her breath, and as soon as the gong was again announcing the start of the next battle, she raised her arms and released as many threads as she could, trying to cover her whole surrounding with it. Obviously, she knew of Hit's ability through Broly when he had mentioned it casually. She knew of his time-skipping power, so she just had to make sure that if he jumped towards her, he would end up in one of her threads and he would be defeated. Hit pulled out one hand. He bent his lower arm and his fist pointed at Zangya. Without a moment of notice, Zangya suddenly felt pain in her stomach as if she was heavily hit by a sledgehammer. Her feet were lifted off the ground as she flew towards the boundary. She forced a breath in and stopped herself from going out of bounds. She then raised an arm and swung it down as if she was wielding a whip. A whipping tone sounded out as well. Hit disappeared and reappeared a couple of meters to the side, while the ground of his prior position split in half. Zangya raised both her arms and relentlessly slashed towards Hit. The ground was slashed apart by an invisible force, but no matter how hard she tried, her attacks didn't connect. She became increasingly exhausted until a shadow appeared right next to her. She couldn't resist in time as Hit kicked her out of bounds. Hit won. Broly flashed from the contestant area and picked Zangya up. He quickly healed her and let her rest with the others. He raised an eyebrow as he looked at Hit on the stage. Hit smiled back as he knew that Broly had noticed the change. Broly then looked at Cooler, who invited Broly to go first. However, someone didn't agree with this arrangement. Beerus pointed at Cooler and coldly said, "You go first." There was no room for negotiations in his tone, and the stare Beerus gave him. Cooler was angry as he knew that Beerus thought that Broly was stronger. Cooler admitted that Broly was strong, but after he attained his golden form, he suspected that he would be Broly's equal. He had hidden most of his strength from everyone, even his temporary mentor, Whis, so Broly wouldn't somehow get to know of the true extent of his might. In a moment of negligence of Broly, he would be able to kill him in an instant. Without having a say in this, he jumped into the ring and faced off Hit. Chapter 217, Cooler vs. Hit. The two watched the other. Although now Cooler's main aim was to kill Broly, he was indeed interested in this assassin that the god of destruction placed so much trust into. When he heard there were other universes and after his mind was freed from Broly's control, certain ambitions took place in his heart. He was previously an emperor of a galaxy, and now he was even stronger. He could feel that he would only grow exceedingly stronger in the future, especially after the control of his mind was removed. With a free mind, his power grew tremendously. It was like a barrier to his potential has been removed. For now, he would see what this Hit had to offer. From what he was able to comprehend from Hit's and Zangya's fight was that Hit could somehow teleport and release invisible attacks. Cooler remained cautious as he looked at his opponent. Hit watched Cooler as well. Hit was able to sense the strong force coming from Cooler. The gong sounded out and Cooler instantly moved out. He didn't hesitate as he closed in and tried to strike down Hit. With a chop of his hand, Cooler aimed for Hit's neck. However, before he could reach him, Hit disappeared. Suddenly Cooler felt a pain in his sides. He stumbled to the side as he put a hand on his side. He looked at Hit, who still had his arm extended. He was confused as to how Hit could be that fast, but he instantly realized something. It couldn't be the same as teleportation. No, it was more than that. Even if Hit could freely teleport, Cooler should be able to sense him if he had appeared next to him, but he didn't register anything until he was hit. Additionally, it seemed like the attack landed at the same time. Hit had disappeared. He was confused, but more so furious. His violent ki burned brightly like a fire. He then abruptly rushed towards Hit once again. His speed was amplified several times as he rushed to the assassin, who gave a quick glance towards the contestant area of Universe 7, to be more precisely to Broly. Cooler quickly arrived and punched out, directly following with a tail whip. This time Hit didn't use his time ability, but lightly pushed the punch with his palm out of the way. He then caught the tail with his other hand. His open palm clenched to a fist and punched at Cooler's chest.
Bang!
The punch of Hit was heavy, making Cooler slid backwards for several meters. Cooler's feet pierced into the ground to stop his momentum. As soon as Cooler stopped, he grasped for air. His chest carapace had a deep fist-sized dent. After taking several deep breaths through his visor, Darth Vader's eyes glowed in a menacing red. "You will pay for that," Cooler screamed out as he released tremendous ki. A golden fire was instantly occupying half of the stage on Cooler's side as his skin turned completely golden. Only his hands and feet remained visibly purple. The spikes on his lower arms seemed sharper and more dangerous than ever. Cooler stomped the ground as he dashed towards Hit, his speed incomparable to before. Instantly arriving in front of Hit, he slashed out with his spikes. His slash was accompanied by a sharp whistle as it sliced through the air. Hit was surprised, but this speed wasn't something he couldn't handle. He stepped backwards and tried his best to redirect the attacks as retaliated from time to time. Some slashes and punches made their way through his defense, but surprisingly, he didn't fell back to his time skip ability. Suddenly, Cooler raised one's hand, high to strike down heavily. Hit's eyes flashed the moment. Cooler's chest opened up. Hit disappeared before revealing himself again with his fist in the throat of Cooler. Cooler took a forceful step backwards as he could feel the blood accumulate in his mouth. He spat out a mouthful of blood. He could feel that his throat was severely injured by the attack just now. Although he had to take a step back, he didn't forget to use his tail to retaliate. Hit tilted his head in the last moment, however. He couldn't escape the whip completely. He took several steps back to create some distance. Hit could feel blood flow down his cheek. He wiped it away before he pointed his fist at Cooler, preparing to release some invisible ki blasts. Cooler's upper body was heaving heavily, not because he was breathing heavily with his injury, but because he was furious. Even though his throat was severely injured, it didn't affect him much. Frost demons have terrifying vitality. They could survive with half their body that withstood an exploding planet, float in space for extended periods of time, and still survive all this with little energy left to begin with. If they could survive something like this, a destroyed throat wasn't worth mentioning. Even if his chest was slashed open, he could probably still fight on freely. Of course, pain resilience was something else as their race was naturally strong. They hardly experienced much hardship. He was about to charge forward again, but he felt a sharp pain coming from his right leg. Instead of moving, he stumbled to his knee. He found himself under invisible attacks as he kneeled on the ground. He raised his arm and shot several ki blasts to give him some time to reorganize himself, but his attacks just flew through Hit as if he was a ghost. What dash! Before he could finish his sentence, his jaw rocked to the side from a heavy impact. Hit watched as Cooler's body skidded over the ground. Hit placed his feet down and squinted his eyes as he watched Cooler get up slowly. At this point, he had the feeling that Cooler was still holding back, but seeing Cooler's current state, he couldn't help but shake his head to dismiss this thought. Maybe he had just overestimated this frost demon. Hit disappeared and emerged behind Cooler to strike him, but a ki blast suddenly exploded in his face. He slid out of the smoke, immediately followed by Cooler's imposing figure. Hit disappeared again and emerged several meters on the other side. He looked on as Cooler released dozens of ki blasts in every direction. Hit instantly understood what happened. This was just a lucky hit from Cooler. The ki blast stopped and Hit took on a boxer-like stance. Cooler had already found him and was about to close in again as he knew that he could probably only overwhelm Hit with his raw power and speed. He would just counterattack Hit's ability with an attack in every direction. Although wasteful and crude, it was the easiest way he could think of to counter that strange ability of Hit. Just as he started moving, Hit seemed to multiply. Cooler was shocked. How could this be? He had long learned ki sensing, but yet every figure he was now seeing and sensing were the same. Fuck this. He knew that he would only suffer if this continues. He flew into the air and raised his hands. It only took an instant and a giant sphere that looked like a sun appeared above Cooler. The time to create this attack was the same as before, but the power was on a completely different scale. He didn't even hesitate as he threw the sun towards the arena. Whis and Vados reacted quickly and each created a barrier on the ground and around the spectators, so this planet and the audience wouldn't be destroyed and killed. Hit squinted his eyes as he looked at the ginormous attack heading towards him. He looked solemn, but there was no fear or concern in his eyes. Hadn't he escaped a similar attack by Broly? This would be no different. He headed into the sun without a moment of hesitation and used his time skip to evade its destructive power. As soon as he evaded the supernova, he saw Cooler still in his throwing position. It seemed like he was prepared for Hit to catch his attack. Seeing Hit going through his special attack, he was flabbergasted, but before he could react, Hit already arrived with a powerful charge. Hit's fist shot through the air, and with all his weight behind it landed in Cooler's face. Cooler crashed into the barrier and collapsed strengthless to the ground. Hit had won once again. Cooler looked at Hit with resentment in his eyes as he was brought out and healed by Whis as he did with the other contestants. Cooler was now sitting with the other spectators as he coldly looked at Broly's back on the arena. Broly hadn't even given him a glance after he was defeated and only focused on Hit. Broly cracked his neck and did some stretches. He rotated his shoulder and did some other warm-up exercises. He smiled at Hit as he spoke out, "Sorry about that. The fight was too interesting, and I forgot to warm up." "Oh, I hoped you learned something from the fight." Hit smirked slightly. Although this person was a dent in his pride and reputation, Hit couldn't help but feel more excited than angry. He wanted to fight against Broly and achieve greater heights with his powers once again. He could only do this by fighting opponents equal or stronger than him. Unfortunately, such beings were far in between in his and seemingly in other universes as well, but now he once again stood in front of someone like that. "I sure did. I didn't think you would improve it by that much," Broly responded as he finished his little warm-up. Chapter 218. Hit's improved time skip. They both took on their stances as they looked at each other. Broly's power was rapidly growing, as did his body size and hair. Without delaying, he was going Super Saiyan 3 right off the bat. Unlike any Saiyan previously, when he transformed there were no major or violent energy pressuring the near periphery. His energy was tame as he quietly transformed. The only indication of the powerful change was his physical appearance, as well, and the ki that was enveloping his body. One could sense his ki, but the ground beneath his feet weren't cracking, neither whirlwinds arose. Hit became more cautious. Hit clenched his fists and tried to find an opening in Broly's presence. Although he couldn't find one, he would just need to test if he could open one. He didn't overthink the situation anymore and used his time skip to pass Broly. He punched out while exiting his personal dimension. The world was again revealed to him. His punch directly landed on Broly's right back shoulder. Hit had concentrated his energy into a single point and managed to pierce into Broly's skin. However, he couldn't celebrate his success as Broly's left heel was heading for his head. Hit hurriedly punched out with his free hand and met Broly's heel. Fortunately for him, his strength was apparently slightly stronger than Broly's, but he still chose to retreat. He felt that Broly was luring him in. Hit could feel his hand tingling from the impact. It seemed to have met his hand awkwardly. If the kick was minimally stronger, the bones might have been seriously injured due to the impact. His hand grew numb, but he didn't check it as he was watching Broly. Broly reached out to his shoulder before looking at his hand, which was slightly dyed red from his blood. Broly looked at Hit and couldn't help but smirk. The strength of that punch was several times higher than when he fought Cooler in the previous round. It seemed that even Cooler wasn't able to force Hit to go all out. Broly raised his hand slightly and with his forefinger waved Hit towards him. He had a grin on his face as if he wasn't impressed by Hit's attack in the least. No, it was more than that. He seemed like he was looking down on it. This made Hit frown slightly before he relaxed again. "I will see where you get your confidence from and then crush you with all I have." Hit thought as he dashed towards Broly. Several copies of Hit appeared, all running towards Broly, while spreading out to cover a greater range. Oh man, I can't see any difference between these hits, Goku exclaimed from the contestant area. The others were quiet, but they too couldn't differentiate them. They had only seen it shortly against Cooler before Cooler released a supernova. Broly didn't look like he wanted to use the same method as the Frost Demon before him. He was just standing calmly as he watched the copies heading towards him. Even Beerus was frowning as he intently looked at the battle. This was the final match. The winner would decide which side would win this tournament. They then jumped towards and attacked Broly at the same time. Broly ignored most of the copies, but suddenly defensively raised his right arm next to his head, while kicking out to the right. Hit's punch was barely blocked. Broly's kick, on the other hand, landed squarely on Hit's stomach. Hit was sent flying but quickly stopped as he used his feet to reduce his speed. I figured as much, Hit set out indifferently. Back in their first fight, Broly was able to tell where he would emerge from his dimension. It wasn't surprising that he could tell that these copies could do no damage. He also figured out that he should stay with his new method of using his ability, as it seemed to be working against Broly. He was now starting his attack inside his dimension and only appear when it was already arriving. This was only possible as he was able to remain in his dimension for a longer period of time. Additionally, he used his dimension to cover a greater area than before, so the possibilities where he would emerge increased. With this, even if Broly knew in which area he would emerge, he wouldn't know the specifics. Would Hit come out in front or behind him, from the sides or from above? Hit dispersed the copies and skipped through time and instantly arrived right next to Broly. Hit's kick landed directly on Broly's unprotected chest, but Broly wasn't sent flying. Broly gritted his teeth as he stayed put with his legs deeply pierced in the ground. He quickly grabbed Hit's leg and pulled it towards him, but Hit quickly skipped time again, appearing behind Broly. Unfortunately, Broly seemed to have predicted this as he already jumped up, spun around and aimed at Hit's head with a tornado kick. Hit tilted his head and was only slightly grazed. As he retreated, a long red line on the side of his face appeared and blood was flowing out. Hit frowned as he wiped away the blood. Every warrior's vitality from the contestant was high and could easily stop a small wound like this from bleeding excessively. Hit again put up both his hands. He suddenly disappeared again, and Broly prepared for the incoming attack. Broly couldn't tell from where the attacks came from, so for him too it seemed to be instantaneously. There were only a few centimeters before the attack landed for Broly to use in trying to defend against it. If he couldn't, then at least trade with it. This was how he decided to fight against Hit. Of course, he could use his illusion to distract Hit for a moment, or even make him completely dazed. But this would be too boring. Besides, he still had several surprises left. He was confident that he would even win without using his soul. In fact, his power now was a lot weaker than in their previous fight. Even Hit could barely tell the difference as Broly's reacting speed was abnormal. Hit had contributed it to Broly's increase in strength and speed, as he couldn't sense if Broly used his soul or not. When Broly was immersed in God Ki and had yet to completely internalize his ki, his body was heavy and therefore moved too slow to react to the attacks of the robot accordingly. He couldn't just rely on his reaction speed through his 5 senses to intercept the attacks, as he would still be hit, especially after Whis had increased the numbers of robots. So, how did he dodge the attacks later on if he didn't rely on the normal 5 senses? He predicted the attacks and trained himself to sense the danger that would be coming. Yes, it wasn't much, but he was able to have a small success in Ultra Instinct. Even if Hit's attack were almost instantaneously, he was still able to barely dodge and block the attacks. Obviously, it was far from the full potential of Ultra Instinct as shown by Goku against Jiren. However, it still gave him a major advantage. Although Hit didn't know of this and assumed that it had to do with this weird power boost that Broly had shown him in the previous fight, this didn't mean everyone was overlooking this. Whis smiled as he observed Broly's movement, while Beerus had doubts in his eyes. He didn't dare come to the conclusion that Broly was able to grasp something from this mysterious realm. Kappa was oblivious as he screamed at Hit to finish Broly off. After all, it seemed that Broly was under a lot of pressure. Vados, on the other hand, was frowning deeply. Her strength and knowledge were at least on par with Whis, so she could tell something was off. It didn't take long before her thoughts were coming to that conclusion. Her eyes widened before she looked at Whis, who gave her a calm smile. She instantly understood from Whis' smile that it really was what she had thought. She gritted her teeth as she continued to watch the fight. I should have forced him to become a candidate to become the god of destruction of my universe. Although she felt regret, her expression quickly relaxed again, so no one was able to see what she was thinking. Kappa, of course, was too focused on the fight as to notice the change of his attendant's face. Hit had already tried several distractions to get some hits on Broly. However, if it wasn't instantaneously, it would only help Broly to counterattack. Hit now resorted to one of his trump cards. It was something to counterattack someone who could see where he would emerge and finish him off in a second. In fact, it was just an improved version of the time skip method he used the whole time up to now. Chapter 219, just a training session. Hit approached Broly once again, but now his ability burst forwards and several exits appeared just around Broly. Hit seamlessly entered his dimension and appeared in front of Broly. He punched out, this time with his bent forefinger slightly extended. With concentrated energy, Hit's finger directly pierced into Broly's skin, leaving a small but deep wound. But he wasn't done. He directly disappeared again and popped up behind as he attacked Broly again. Hit's body flashed and seemed to rapidly teleport around Broly as he attacked him from all sides. Most of the time, it seemed like Hit was at multiple places at the same time. Hit's attacking speed seemed to have become even faster, and his positioning looked instantaneously. As a mere Super Saiyan 3, Broly had no way of dodging the onslaught of attacks, even with his insights into Ultra Instinct. In just a second, Broly's body was covered in open wounds. Broly's body was completely bloody like the time when he came out of the staff. Hit retreated again, while breathing heavily. This attack expended a lot of energy and used up a lot of stored skip time. However, with this, Broly's body was severely injured. Broly couldn't use his left arm and leg anymore. His arm was limply hanging on the side, while he supported his weight with his other leg. However, his right side was severely hindered in its functions as well. Broly even spat out a mouthful of blood. However, against all expectations, he was still grinning. This sent a shiver down the assassin's spine. Did I miss something? He is clearly already with one foot in the grave. Hit thought. Indeed, although the contestants couldn't kill each other, Hit knew that Broly was tough and would survive his attacks, even if he aimed at vital points of the body. Besides, he was one of his targets. Although he had already been rewards, he still had to accomplish his mission. A normal being would have already ended up dead several times, but Broly was still standing and grinning as if he had everything in control. Do you really think you could win with these wounds? Hit couldn't help but ask. Broly smiled as he opened his mouth to speak. "'Tis but a scratch." "A scratch? You are almost dead." Hit rebutted as he looked at Broly in disbelief. "No, I am not." Broly spoke as if he just stated a fact. "Your body is covered in wounds." Hit pointed at him, especially to the gaping holes on the left side of Broly's body. Broly only glanced at it shortly. "I had worse." "You?" Hit didn't know what to say, but he suddenly noticed something. "Man, this is why you don't delay your victory." Broly's body suddenly healed at a visible rate. In just a few seconds, the wounds had closed. With a small key burst, Broly threw off the blood on his body, and he once again looked like he had just entered the fight. Of course, his clothes were still destroyed, but even that was fixed by Broly with his magic. Broly held up a finger and said, "1 second." Suddenly his body changed again. He seemed to regress to his base form, but his hair was still glowing brightly green. Less ki was being leaked to the surroundings, but Hit could feel that Broly wasn't getting weaker. In fact, he was getting stronger. Since Broly wasn't using his soul power, Hit could sense how much stronger Broly got. He was now 5 times stronger than before. Hit was only slightly able to suppress Broly previously. Now with this boost, there was no telling if Hit could stand up to this. But would he just give up? Of course not. He was the greatest assassin. He wouldn't just lay down in front of a challenge. He would step forward and meet it. Hit gritted his teeth and headed straight into battle once more. Broly had already recuperated from his wounds. He had used the life force from his soul to heal his wounds. To be honest, he could have done it faster, but he wouldn't just reveal the full extent of his trump cards. Now, would he? That he could heal in mere tens of seconds was already enough to shock the audience. He noticed the flash in Cell's eyes and the dumbfounded expression of Cooler. There was even a hint of fear in his eyes. The Earthlings made an ugly expression as well. To recuperate in seconds was already a game changer. But now he had revealed a new form that was 5 times as strong as his Super Saiyan 3. No one would claim that they could kill Super Saiyan 3 Broly in a one-on-one for sure, but now their chances became ever so slim. Due to the threat Broly posed on the Earthlings and his schemes against Cell and Cooler, most of Universe 7 were subconsciously rooting for Hit, the assassin. Obviously, this didn't include Beerus, who looked like he would jump in excitement at any moment now. Hit dashed towards Broly, and without hesitating used his time skip to deliver a blow. He aimed at Broly's throat. As soon as he came out of his dimension, his fist was only a few centimeters away. Hit stared into Broly's eyes and couldn't help but tremble slightly. Broly had a ferocious smile on his face as he looked at Hit as if he was a delicious piece of meat, ready to be devoured. Broly didn't dodge or block the attack. His right arm turned into a blur as it headed for Hit's temple. Hit didn't retreat either, but completed his attack. His finger pierced into Broly's throat, but before it could do major damage, he was slapped away. Hit body shot away like a fired cannonball. Hit did a roll before landing on his feet again, stopping himself from going out of bounds. Blood down his temple, which he shortly wiped away. However, the ringing in his ears and the pain in his skull made it obvious that some bones had cracked. Broly's throat was slightly bloody, but in no way would it affect him in any way. Broly didn't heal himself as it would interfere with what he wanted to train. Yes, he didn't see this as a tournament. He just saw it as an opportunity to train himself. When he had trained in this God Key chamber, he had forced himself to dodge and block the attacks that were coming at him. With this, he was able to glimpse into Ultra Instinct, to be more precise, into avoiding danger. He had a hard time to grasp it as it wasn't in his nature to dodge or even block. Usually he would just use his unnaturally tough body to welcome the attacks, or just completely overwhelm his opponent with his strength. When attacked relentlessly by dozens of robots that could easily injure him, was he someone to take that lying down? To be constantly attacked without being able to retaliate infuriated Broly more and more. At one point he snapped, and when he came back to himself again, all the robots were in pieces. Until that point there had been more than 100 of different robots. Although he had destroyed them all, his body had suffered several wounds, some of which would be lethal for other beings. He now wanted to replicate this state of being. He not only wanted to master avoiding every danger, he also wanted to be able to kill everything. To be the best, he needed to combine these two states, but it was harder done than said. Broly was confused as to why he could now dodge better than attack, even though he was naturally more on the offensive side of the spectrum. Maybe it had something to do with the self-preservation of living beings, or the concept of attacking itself as it needed an opening in the opponent's defense to do serious damage. Either way, since he was already better in dodging now, he thought he might as well focus on attacking, while his body was in charge of dodging. Obviously his first attempt was a failure as he was hit by hit, but aren't failures just stepping stones on the path to success? Broly didn't ponder about it anymore and charged towards hit. He closed in with tremendous speed, but his chop just hit empty air. Chapter 220, Champion. As soon as he missed, Broly flew into the air, as if he had known all along that he wouldn't have landed a blow on hit. Hit appeared in the air, but this time he didn't use his time skip to evade Broly. Instead he flew at him to clash. Their speeds increased as they started crashing into one another at high speed. Their every move became so quick that the audience couldn't even see them. Even the other disqualified contestants furrowed their eyebrows as they tried their best to capture their movements. With every clash a thunderous booming echoed on the stage. It was like two titans were rapidly clashing against each other. Their fight, if placed on a normal planet, would have been the end for whatever civilization had previously resided on it. Hit's ability to escape from harm and his attacking speed due to his time skip could be said to be unbeatable in both their respectable universes. However, even he could only fight out a stalemate against Broly. Broly blocked out any other thoughts as he fought Hit, be it the Super Dragon Balls or any strategies to combat Hit. He only focused on one thing, and that was to attack, to kill. Nothing else mattered, not even how he would achieve his kill. As the fight continued, the blood and battle lust inside him calmed down. At one point, he seemed to have entered a serene state as he dodged and blocked Hit's attacks with minimal movement and counterattacked with deadly strikes. Everything that he willed was succeeding. It felt like he could read Hit like an open book. He built up an invincible momentum. He could feel it. He was scratching at the walls of Ultra Instinct. One step forward, and he would enter a new realm and step onto new heights. Just as these thoughts went through his mind, this state slipped away immediately. An instant of fleeting joy had directly hindered his progress. Broly's arm was extended, and he could feel the blood flowing down his hand. It was lying on the floor a few meters away, while holding his neck. Blood was slowly dripping down the floor through the gaps between his fingers. He was breathing heavily. Sweat and blood was running down his cheek. He glanced at Broly before he collapsed. Broly felt a wave of fatigue hit him. He could feel that he had expended a lot of energy through this state at the end. He was breathing heavily as he tried to regulate his body. His body was arching as well. The state he was in just now had only lasted an instant, but this time he remembered everything he did. The audience was so silent, one could hear a pin drop. Even Beerus had his eyes wide open as he looked at Broly. Kampa was sweating profusely as he looked at the state of the two warriors. When Broly was able to reach his hand to the realm of Ultra Instinct, his body had flashed. High green ki had flashed blue-whitish in just a moment. Broly's arms seemed to have stopped. Flashes too fast to detect followed, and in the next moment, several fist marks and cuts erupted on Hit's body at the same time, throwing him into the air without being able to resist at all. Broly slowly stood up again before he looked at both his hands. They were covered in blood. He clenched them into fists before a smile blossomed on his face. Although he hadn't stepped into Ultra Instinct, he had gained some more insights into this realm. It was somewhat regrettable that he couldn't show off his new transformation, but he had gained too much to care to be sad about something trivial as that. In the future, it would be a lot easier for him to become more efficient in a fight, be it dodging, blocking, or attacking. It wasn't really Ultra Instinct, but his fighting capabilities would have the edge in terms of reactional speed against other beings. He hadn't even entered the realm and only glimpsed into it from outside, but he still made exceptional progress and his strength rose by a couple of times. He then couldn't help but glance at the referee. He hurried him with his eyes to announce his victory. He was already standing there for almost a minute. How long did he intend to wait? Seeing him look over, the referee instantly understood and announced his victory. Broly picked it up and threw him onto the contestants' area of Universe 6, so Vados could heal him. Kampa, unlike the series, didn't throw a tantrum and wanted to punish his fighters, but instead just looked at Broly. There even seemed to be some fear in his eyes. Vados, come, let's go. Beerus, you have won this time. Your fighters were exceptionally strong. Beerus could feel the underlying meaning in his words as he glanced at Broly. Indeed, this mortal was dangerous. However, Beerus was smiling as he looked at the Saiyan. This one will surely give him an extraordinary fight. Just as the members of Universe 6 wanted to depart, 3 figures appeared in the middle of the arena. Kampa, Beerus, the 2 attendants notified their respective god of destruction of the arrival of someone. They were initially disinterested, but after they looked at the figures that appeared, their countenance changed. They both released a gasp at the same time. They instantly knew who had appeared in the middle of the arena, and they couldn't help but be fearful. Hither. That person is? Kampa stammered as he sweated heavily. The king of all. The 2 gods blurted out. Without daring to delay, they arrived in the middle of the arena and bowed deeply to Lord Zeno. Welcome, Lord Zeno. Yeah. The little creature responded in a childlike voice. The 2 angel attendants arrived behind their gods. We haven't seen you for a long time. Whis said happily. Yeah. Have you been good? Vados added. Yeah. The gods were sweating, and the Kais of Universe 6 have already prostrated behind the gods of destruction. Lord Zeno, what can we do for you today? One Kai of Universe 6 asked respectfully. I came here because it was brought to my attention that today you were doing something arbitrarily. The gods flinched as they heard this. Kampa even screamed out in fear. Skipping your job of being a god of destruction is not a good thing. I deeply apologize, Beerus quickly said, hoping that Lord Zeno would spare them. Broly watched the exchange between the gods with some amusement. It was an almost complete reenactment of the scene in the series. It felt like he was back at home watching this anime on his monitor. It was quite funny to see Whis and Vados complain about their god of destruction. Broly couldn't help but laugh when Lord Zeno said that he would appoint new god of destruction, only to rebut that with a "just kidding." This of course earned him a glare from Beerus, which made it even funnier. The gods were fearing for their lives while he was relaxing. He even wanted to start eating until he looked at the back of his palm. Lord Zeno then went on about how exciting he thought the tournament was and wanted to see more, only with every universe participating. At one point Goku flew to the arena with the other contestants in tow. It would have been too rude to not say hello if everyone else went, so Broly followed. He was worried that Lord Zeno would notice the sword on the back of his hand, but he knew hiding something would only make it more likely for it to be revealed. Additionally, he couldn't just leave without the Super Dragon Balls. He had searched and fought for them. He wanted his wish. He gambled that Lord Zeno wouldn't notice anything, and if he did, he would erupt with the full strength of his sword and escape from this multiverse, or at least from this timeline. If he casted some illusion, it would probably invite Zeno to look at it more closely. Broly just hoped that his plot armor is strong enough. They stepped on the stage and Goku headed to Zeno and even picked him up, much to the distress for Beerus and Kampa. Although Goku had a more serious approach towards Broly, he was still an idiot. Zeno disappeared as quickly as he came after making the promise to Goku that he would hold a tournament. He even spoke some words of praise towards Broly. Broly followed Lord Zeno with his eyes as he was carried away by his 2 bodyguards. Broly couldn't help but shudder as he thought about the 2. Even though he could sense God Ki by now, he wasn't able to discern their strength at all. The same went for Lord Zeno himself. He rubbed his chin as he thought why the king of all needed bodyguards anyway. Chapter 221, Super Shenron. Broly's thoughts were interrupted when the gods of destruction sighed out in relief. Beerus started reprimanding Goku for his carelessness, but Goku just laughed it off. Kampa frustratedly flew away and Vados took the other contestants away to their universe. Whis then revealed to them that they were fighting on the last Super Dragon Ball all along. Now capable of having his wish fulfilled, Beerus wanted to conclude this little event. He was quite curious about Super Shenron as well. Although he had been the god of destruction for eons, he had never seen this celestial dragon. Bulma approached Beerus and pleaded that he wouldn't wish for something evil. Beerus reassured her, but he himself wasn't sure what he should wish for. As he was pondering about his wish, a deep voice sounded out from the side. Lord Beerus, could I have a word with you? Broly said as he looked intently at the god of destruction. Speak. Beerus responded while glancing at Broly. I want to ask of you, if I could have this wish. And why should I hand it over to you? Beerus said calmly. He was inclined to listen to him. After all, Broly was the one who was responsible that they could have this wish. If you do this, I will tell you of a planet where the most delicious cuisine is. I am 100% certain that it will be a heavenly paradise for your taste buds. Oh. Beerus was more than intrigued. He already decided to give Broly his wish, but only if it was true. Broly could have just tell him anything. It would be foolish for Beerus to just give it to him without any proof. Yes, here have a taste. Broly suddenly retrieved 2 vanilla puddings from a capsule. Broly quietly waited for the 2 deities to calm down from their food high. Broly thought that it was fascinating how they could speak volumes about a simple pudding. Maybe it goes in hand if you oversee a whole universe with different beings and different tastes for millions of years. It just happened to be that Beerus' taste was aligned with that of Earthlings. What do you say, Lord Beerus? From where that came from is a lot more. Broly smiled as he looked at the relishing Beerus. He already knew that he had already convinced this god. As expected, as soon as he said those words, Beerus nodded and said, "Go ahead. If I get more food, my wish had already been fulfilled anyway." Broly quickly took out more pudding and let the 2 deities eat their full. "Just remember, if I don't like your wish, I will intervene," Beerus said happily as he tasted the pudding. Broly, of course, knew that anything that would affect Beerus himself or his status, he would take action, but Broly would never eye for their position anyway. Broly nodded and reassured that it isn't something that needs to be worried about. Bulma and the others would have been very displeased. How couldn't they? Broly, who wanted to destroy their planet, was trying to get a wish from the most powerful dragon that existed in this universe. How could anything that Broly wishes for be anything good? Good thing was that Broly had created a magic barrier, so they couldn't listen in on the conversation, but even a fool would know that Broly wanted to get the wish. However, Broly only wanted that the Earthlings didn't know that he was buying these deities with food from Earth. Broly glanced at Cooler, who was blankly staring ahead. It seemed that the shock he received after witnessing Broly's strength was enough to deter him from taking action. Although he had hid some of his strength, it would still be a far cry to defeat Broly, especially that flash in which Broly had completely obliterated Hit in an instant. Cell nodded to him when he noticed Broly's glance. Broly returned it and looked at the Earthlings, who had a solemn expression, while looking at Broly interacting with Beerus. They were already high above the Super Dragon Balls. Whis asked Broly if he wanted to begin. Whis was ready to be the translator for him, but Broly politely declined him. Broly stepped out of the transparent cube and stood on top of it. Without delaying, Broly spoke out. His voice was amplified with his key. "Come forth, God of Dragons, and grant my wish, easy peasy lemon squeezy." Broly spoke out in God language. It sounded a bit weird and unfamiliar, however, Broly was well versed in it after he studied it from his daughter's notes. Nothing happened for a while, and the others were already wondering if it didn't work. Beerus deeply looked at Broly's back as he pondered why this mortal knew of the god's language. However, he quickly dismissed these thoughts. It was indeed a language known by all gods, but it isn't exclusive to them. There may be individuals who somehow managed to learn it. It wasn't too weird for Broly to know of it. Beerus redirected his focus back on the Super Dragon Balls, which started to glow slightly. These planet-sized Dragon Balls suddenly reorganized their position at breaknecking speed. They rearranged themselves into a hexagon with the 4-star Dragon Ball in the middle. They distanced themselves slightly before golden lightning extended to the middle Dragon Ball from the others. As the lightning faded, the Dragon Ball started glowing intensely. The intensity of the emitted light grew rapidly. The Dragon Balls gave off tremendous power, threatening to destroy the ones present. Whis reacted quickly and commanded the cube to fly backwards. As a whirl, the light was then sucked into a single point, before the light once again erupted. The mortals present were getting nervous that something bad might happen. It indeed looked like it was about to explode. Even Broly felt uneasy as he felt the immense power hiding behind the light. The light became so bright that no one was able to see what was happening. The whole space around them was vibrating. It took a few seconds before the light dimmed and the dragon was revealed. Of course, only Broly knew that the huge eye that was taking up the whole view was the dragon's eye. The dragon then opened its eyes and a red glow appeared as if rays would shoot out of them any second. The dragon flew up in the sky and roared loudly. If it weren't for the protection of the cube, they might have just fainted from the pressure. The dragon glowed golden as lightning appeared on its skin. Suddenly it began to shrink, and they were finally able to see more of its body. It then swallowed them whole. The outer shell of the dragon was still several times larger than clusters of galaxies. It was taking up a huge space of the entire universe. Its size was unbelievable. Stars and galaxies flashed past them as they headed towards the core of the dragon through some kind of gate, Whis explained. It took them a while before they arrived in front of an exact replicate of the dragon, only much smaller. It then began to speak in the language of gods, asking them to state their wish. Broly stepped forward and spoke in the language of the gods. Saiyan curse? Beerus mumbled as he rubbed his chin, while looking at Broly. The dragon spoke out again. Tisage. Broly frowned as he seemed to ponder about something. He again spoke out, seemingly stating his wish. The dragon's eyes flashed before he spoke out again and disappeared in a flash. The Super Dragon Balls were then again spread into the two universes to be gathered again in a year's time. Oja hadn't expected that. Congratulations on your immortality, was congratulated Broly, who had flashed green for a second when the dragon was fulfilling his wish. Immortality? Bulma was freaking out when she looked at Broly and then to Beerus. She looked pleadingly as if she wanted Beerus to do something. She wouldn't be able to sleep well if that man became an immortal. She wasn't the only one that was freaking out. The others did too, especially Cooler. Beerus crossed his arms before calmly responding, "It is not really immortality, but it also isn't. You could probably still kill him. Well, it is not for me to divulge his wish to you." Broly was surprised that Beerus wasn't revealing it to them. However, it wouldn't make any difference. Chapter 222, Broly's Wish. Of course, there were several wishes he wanted to have fulfilled. He had first wished for the Saiyan curse to be lifted, and what the dragon said was rather interesting, which had also aligned with what he got to know from the ancient civilization. Every being in this multiverse, except for the Omni King, had an upper limit. Maybe it was a natural law, or something made by the Omni King himself. If a being had trained in the most optimal and most efficient way possible until he used up all his potential and reached his peak, he would never be able to wrest himself from the influence of the multiverse and advance further. This was the case for the mortals as well as for the gods. Everyone had an upper limit. It may vary from individual to individual, but one's potential would someday reach its summit. With the use of God Ki, every being could raise their upper limit by a notch if their body could sustain this kind of energy. Especially, gods of destruction, at its ascending, would also be granted a lot of power and room to grow. To a degree, they weren't influenced by even space and time. They were to govern every other being in their universe after all, and it would be a rare occurrence if such a being was born. This was also why this era with Goku and Jiren was such a miraculous event. An era in which two such beings were able to surpass the weaker gods of destruction that would probably only occur every tens of millions of years. To become a god of destruction would grant oneself immeasurable immediate gains, but also tremendous opportunities for the future. However, everything came with a price. After becoming a god, one's connection with the multiverse would deepen, a connection that couldn't be severed anymore after it was established. Additionally, the god's life would be linked with the weak Supreme Kai's. This was enough reasons why he would never become a god. He didn't want to bound himself to this multiverse or to a Kai. His ambitions had grown with his strength. When Broly received the knowledge of the history of the ancient civilization, he had seen the war they waged with near multiverses. One part in particular was interesting. There were many humanoids mostly covered in fur who had attacked their forces. With every battle, these opponents grew in strength. There didn't seem to be an end to their potential, and as they fought, they became increasingly dangerous. Of course, with the strength of the ancient civilization, Para, they had decimated thousands of these exceptional beings. These beings were Saiyans. In ancient times, they were born with no limits. Broly suspected that either the Omni King or someone of his capabilities had created this race in order to wage war. However, afterwards they were too dangerous to be let loose with their unlimited potential. Someone had restricted their potential by binding them once again to the multiverse. So, in fact, the Saiyan curse was just a normal restriction, which should have been there to begin with and was ever present in every other being. From this, Broly had suspected that this upper limit was a man-made restriction and not a natural law of this multiverse. It was probably the Omni King. Broly had the feeling that Lord Zeno was just faking his childlike attitude and appearance, but he wasn't entirely sure yet. He also guessed that one of Lord Zeno's abilities was to be able to exterminate all beings that were connected to this multiverse. The ancient Saiyans would surely be a threat to his reign if that was the case. As for what this curse breaker that the Frost Demon had mentioned was, Broly could only guess, but considering what he knew already, it was likely that it was just a fake beacon for the Saiyans to pursue. They would sacrifice much blood to get their hands on something to break their curse, only to be all in vain in the end. It didn't help that all the other races suddenly turned against the Saiyans, which probably wasn't a coincidence either. Either way, he had no thoughts on binding himself to this multiverse. That was why he had wished for all his power to be part of his soul. His ki and his innate Saiyan powers would root in his soul. He had two reasons for this. One reason, of course, would be the near immortality that was had mentioned. Even if his body died, his powerful soul could then resist the call of the afterlife. With time and his life force, he could heal and even rebuild his body. Obviously, that would take a lot of time to do, but it was better than dying altogether, wasn't it? To kill his soul would need to have it attacked by powers on the level of God Ki. It would exhaust his soul's energies and let him die from starvation. The gods of destruction, on the other hand, could just erase his existence with Hakai energy. Normal people's energies would deplete over time if they didn't cultivate. When the soul wasn't bound to a body, they would also feel the pull of the afterlife and the pressure of the universe, which quickened their depletion. Their only chance for survival would be to cultivate non-stop. During that, they would hardly be able to create a new body. That was also why Cacus had attached himself to Broly instead of creating his own body. Furthermore, Broly had the privilege that he could automatically generate his energies. He didn't need to deliberately cultivate and could put his attention to other things. With his entire being merged into his soul, he was probably one of the few that could actually survive and resurrect on his own without relying on others. Indeed, he could be said to be immortal now, and for everyone else it looked like that was his aim all along. However, this wasn't his main reason for having this wish fulfilled. Due to the first sword of Para and his soul's transformation and baptism, his soul's connection to this multiverse was already severed and part of his energy was merged with it. Even then, he was still bound to this multiverse. His Saiyan powers and his ki belonged to the body and was thus still part of this multiverse. If he wanted to ascend, if he wanted to surpass Lord Zeno himself, he needed all his strength to be his own. With this, his potential wasn't limited anymore. He could now soar. When he had his wish fulfilled, the sword had intercepted the dragon god's power, shaped and augmented it with the technique that was used to place his other energies into his soul previously. Broly had his doubts if his wish could be granted like he wanted, as there were too many factors to be considered. He couldn't be too specific with his wish. He couldn't wish for something like severe the energy's connection to the universe as well, but fortunately the sword in Para's technique was flexible. It guided and transformed the dragon god's power. It was currently in the midst of severing the connection. It was an excruciating experience, but he was already used to all kinds of pain and didn't grimace even slightly. Broly had directly felt the changes in his being. He felt like he was only wearing his body, instead of identifying it as himself. Obviously, he had felt this in his first transformation as well, but now it was almost finished. This was also the reason why he didn't want to wish for an immortal body. The worst scenario would be that the connection between the immortal and the multiverse would tighten. That being would have to serve the multiverse for eternity. The best scenario would be if one really only ended up with an immortal body, but the immortal still could never surpass Lord Zeno. The body would still have a loose connection to the multiverse. In both scenarios, the immortal could never fully extricate himself from the multiverse's influence, and with the body as an anchor, he could never surpass the upper limit. Broly had gained what he was after all this time. He was one step of being completely free. The sword would help him be undetected, otherwise he would have already died by Lord Zeno's hands. There was one thing left for him to do. Although his soul was free, his body was not. It was now only an empty shell, but it still belonged to this multiverse. His body, in a sense, was also just energy from Universe 7. Who knew if he could be tracked or restricted through it by Lord Zeno in the future? If he wanted to be a complete independent being in this multiverse, he needed to destroy his body and recreate it with his own energy. He would be vulnerable for some time as his soul was without protection. His tempered body wouldn't be as strong as it was currently, but every hidden restriction would be lifted. Broly wanted to be thorough. In the series, Lord Zeno had only initiated the tournament after Goku's reminder. So, if he wanted to replace his own body, Goku needed some distractions to not get bored. Broly grinned as he thought about it. He would prepare enough villains to give Goku a headache. Chapter 223. I still want to kill you. No one of the crew had seen any changes on Broly, as they couldn't see Broly's triangle on the back of his hand. The triangle represented the consistence of his soul, and now with 2 new additional energies, his symbol was slowly changing as well. The 3 colors converged together. His tattoo was flashing brightly as it represented the soul's change. With this transformation, pain followed closely. However, Broly just closed his eyes as he pondered about how he would entertain Goku and his crew. They were silently flying towards planet Earth as Broly had told Whis that he wanted to show them the planet he had promised to present. Beerus was yawning from time to time as if he was about to fall asleep very soon. The Earthlings were talking about mundane stuff, while Goku was babbling about the fights and how excited he was to meet the other fighters of the other universes. Broly opened his eyes and looked at Goku's back. Should I just kill them? I could resurrect them after I am unbound. He thought as he heard that Goku's desire to meet strong opponents. Goku suddenly stopped speaking and shot a look at Broly. He had felt killing intent coming from Broly for just a moment. Although he seemed to be always relaxed, with Broly behind him he couldn't help but stay cautious. Broly smiled slightly at Goku. Let me advise you. You should better focus on this universe and on your planet in particular. I am still intending to kill you lot in a few years. After all, if you can't even stand up to me, you won't be able to live until Lord Zeno's tournament. Broly deliberately released killing intent towards the Earthlings, which didn't go well with Beerus, who shot Broly a look. You want to kill them? I still need them for the tournament. Beerus said coldly. Humph. Just give them their body after they died. They can fight as dead people. Beerus squinted his eyes. Did you just snort at me? Broly turned his head indifferently. Broly knew that although everyone here could die and used as a dead contestant or resurrected through the Dragon Balls, Beerus wouldn't dare to erase even one of the people present. The ones gathered were the elites of his universe. After all, Beerus was about to teach Broly a lesson before Whis announced their arrival. As they dismounted from the cube, Broly began to talk about Earth and its delicacies to Beerus, whose attitude towards Broly immediately flipped again. The Earthlings were stunned as they heard Broly talk about all kinds of different food of their planet. They had landed in Bulma's garden, and Broly directly went inside the building, preparing something to eat. Of course, he didn't do it himself. He just controlled some of Bulma's chefs to do it for him. The Earthlings were dumbfounded when they saw Broly treat this place as his home. Vegeta was already at his limit, and with crossed arms began rapidly tapping on his upper arm. It didn't take long until Broly presented some food to Beerus, who happily began to eat. I think you should entertain the god of destruction with your best meals. He will surely be happy with your hospitality. He glanced through the ranks of the Earthlings before he teleported the others to Exausia. He even dragged Cooler with him. Even though he wanted to resist and flee, he stood no chance against Broly's prowess. He quickly left the deities to the Earthlings. Beerus watched Broly's departure. He sure is arrogant and too prideful. Beerus commented with a cold tone that only Whis heard. Whis put his hand in front of his mouth and laughed. Ho ho ho! From what I can tell from his feats, he is even more ruthless, not only to his enemies but especially to himself. Indeed. Which is why I wonder why he didn't get rid of this bunch immediately. Beerus said quietly as he continued eating the delicious meal that was presented to him. Maybe it has something to do with him being a time patroller. Whis responded casually. His answer almost made Beerus spit out the food in his mouth. Excuse me? Oh, didn't I tell you? Krenoa had told me about Broly and his help in fixing the timeline. Additionally, he seemed to have cared about the father of Goku, Bardock. Well, at least he wanted him to return to Goku. He also fought on the same side with the other versions of some of the Earthlings. Beerus raised his eyebrows as he thought about it. Does that mean they only live because he has some sentimental feelings towards those he had fought with? Beerus pondered, but he quickly dismissed these trivial thoughts and focused on what was important, his food. While Beerus spent some time on Earth, Broly was back on his throne as he looked down at Cooler. The new Super Saiyans wanted to submit Cooler and force him to kneel, but Broly dismissed them out of the throne hall. The other Exausians left as well. Only Cell and Cooler remained in the hall. So, you have wrested yourself from my control. Cooler looked at Broly with obvious anger in his eyes, but also with hidden fear. Humph. After Whis showed me this back entrance you have placed in my soul, I immediately got rid of it and I don't regret it in the least. I would rather die than be your puppet. Cooler began to shout as he vented his frustration. He knew that he would most likely die here. Broly frowned as he looked at Cooler. Man, there is no need to yell. I am like 5 meters away. He then turned towards Cell. Anything you want to add? Cell stared at Broly for a silent minute before he spoke out. I don't care about it that much. I only respect the strong, and currently you are better than me. If I surpass you in the future, you are dead. Broly nodded as he heard this. Although he has different DNA from many warriors, most of it came from Saiyans. It was in their nature to worship the strong. It was also probable that his environment had shaped his attitude. If one didn't count the years in his cocoon or his birthing chamber, he was technically a child, after all. Besides, if there appeared a Saiyan that was stronger than Broly, he would do the same as Cell intends to do. You both have done well. Cell and Cooler sounded out at the same time. They couldn't believe it. Was he praising them for escaping his control? I myself like to be free, and I think it would be wrong to hold some resentment towards you. It didn't affect me in the least as well. So, you have shown yourself worthy to be free. You are free to go. With a wave of his hand, the sturdy and tall gate opened, revealing their way to freedom. If you still want to stay and work for me, you are welcome. If you don't want to, there is the door. I will give you the chance and not attack you if you don't provoke me. I have decided to work for you, at least for now, Cell said with crossed arms. Broly just nodded. Cell used to be incomparable, prideful, and arrogant. The other Super Saiyans and his friends had humbled him deeply. Furthermore, he is still ambitious and wants to surpass and eventually replace me. He will achieve great power. Cooler, on the other hand, he gritted his teeth before he turned around to walk out of the throne hall. Cooler! Broly called out to him again, which made Cooler halt in front of the doorstep. You are a Frost Demon Emperor. You have an army and loyal subjects. You are ambitious and want to rule the universe. I can see and understand that, but there will be only one ruler left in the end. The strongest will stand at the peak, and the weak will only gather the scraps that have fallen to the ground. There is also only so much you can achieve with schemes, but surely you already knew this. With these words, Broly's figure had disappeared from the throne, leaving only his echoes in the hall. Cooler clenched his fists before proceeded to go outside. From this point onwards, he needed to go all out. Otherwise, he would end up dead or worse, live in mediocrity. Broly was now beginning to search for the universe for some particular beings that would be hopefully enough to entertain Kakarot. It didn't take long until he landed on a now barren planet. There were only ruins on this planet from a civilization that had been destroyed not long ago. What do you want? An aggrieved voice screamed out in the distance. Broly quickly headed there and looked at the play that was unfolding in front of his eyes. Several figures of different stature were surrounding a group of simple-looking villagers. One by one, the figures killed the group until no one was left. Even children weren't spared. Broly could only lament in his heart. Due to these figures' intervention, another trading partner has been lost, and a planet was in ruins. It would take several decades for the planet to recover and millions of years for another civilization to pop up. Nevertheless, he was still happy to have found him this easily. Who goes there? One of them seemed a bit panicky and hurriedly turned towards Broly's direction. Broly was still in thoughts and began to mumble to himself. The first present for Goku. After I collected the 3 of them, I will be able to have my rebirth. Chapter 224. Gathering Villains 1. Who the fuck are you? One of the subordinates shouted out as he saw Broly walk towards them. Pui Pui, was it? Broly said after being brought back to attention. He let his eyes wander through the ranks of the subordinates until his gaze landed on the smallest figure of them. Broly observed the small yellow alien wizard from head to toe. The wizard looked frail and had a big M on his stomach. Broly could feel the immense magic power that he was emitting. It was rare to see beings that wholly specialized in magic, but it seemingly paid out for this wizard. Hello, Babidi. Broly smiled as he looked at the wizard that was supposed to awaken the demon, Majin Buu, which was hidden on Earth by this wizard's father, Babidi. Babidi was stunned for a second before he began to smile. Oh, has my name spread through the universe already? To meet you, King Broly, it is an honor. Babidi bowed slightly while chuckling eerily. Babidi suddenly stretched out his arms towards Broly and strange magical waves immediately headed towards Broly. The Saiyan just stood there with crossed arms with an amused smile on his face. Babidi frowned as sweat started flowing down his cheek. He increased his magic output to the max, but Broly remained the same with no indication that it affected him. What are you waiting for? Distract him. Babidi shouted anxiously as he tried to enter this Saiyan's heart. He had heard of his feats, but it didn't matter how strong the person was. As long as the person had evil inside him, he could use his magic to turn them into his puppets, but now it looked like it was completely useless against the king of Exaosia. He didn't believe that Broly's mental fortitude was stronger than his magic. Indeed, Broly wasn't blocking the magical manipulation, he just remained steadfast with his indomitable will. Babidi's subordinates immediately rushed towards Broly, who stood still and looked at them as if they were clowns. All right, let's end this farce before it begins. Nothing was captured by Babidi. The only thing he saw was that his subordinates collapsed before they could reach him. What just happened? Babidi was dumbfounded. Suddenly a tall blade with a star handguard fell from the sky and pierced the ground, followed by a red-skinned demon in a light blue suit with a white cape. Babidi subconsciously stepped backwards as he saw his trump card, Dabura, that he had arduously subdued, fall victim to whatever Broly did. Now, let's have a talk, Broly said while walking into some ruins that were still somewhat resembling a building. Broly and Babidi sat down on some shabby chairs and a table. Babidi didn't say anything and had his head lowered, not daring to look straight at Broly. I know where Majin Buu is. Babidi looked shocked at Broly, who said that with an innocent smile on his face, but to Babidi it looked like a devil's smile. After the initial shock calmed down, he began to be excited to hear that he had finally got some clues on where Majin Buu was sealed away. He was anxious to get his hands on this demon, as he still got a Kai on his tails. He wanted to have the location of Buu, but he felt like Broly might just ask for his soul in exchange. While Babidi was occupied in his thoughts, Broly placed a device on the table. He pressed on it a couple of times, and some pictures of the Earthlings, as well as the Earth itself, was displayed. The demon is sealed on this planet. I want you to revive him and kill these people for me, Broly said calmly as he waited for Babidi to recover from the shocking turn of events. He wanted him to do something that he wanted anyway. As for killing some Earthlings, how would that be a problem for him, Babidi? If he had the most powerful demon under his control, he was even confident that he could even contend with Broly himself, if he were to believe the myths about this creature that was once controlled by his father. Even the divine Kais were defeated by it. Babidi was very excited and directly nodded his head. Although he didn't like the commanding attitude of Broly, he was too afraid to stand up against this fearful king. Besides, Broly came with good attention and Babidi would happily accept it. Of course, they are as good as dead. Don't be too hasty. There are several things you have to consider. Look at this. These are Dragon Balls with them. Broly showed him how to find and use the Dragon Balls. He told him to ask of Shenlong to recharge Buu's energy. He also told him of the capabilities of the Earthlings. Additionally, he gave him a location of a warehouse, where supposedly some emperors would be residing. It was a base of some rebels. They were the emperors that had stood up against Exaosia, and were now trying to recuperate in that base. Broly had let them be and only placed some spies into this underground rebel force. He even sneakily helped them become a symbol of hope for the former emperors. With this, they would all gather in this organization, and Broly could easily monitor them. He told Babidi that he could get some new subordinates from this place. The former emperors would have plenty of evil inside them for this wizard to use. After he finished with all this, at last he placed 2 pearls on the table. One was red and as big as a fist, and the other one was blue and as big as a peach. Babidi opened his eyes wide as he sensed the enormous magical power inside both. But the red one seemed to have something else mixed into it, some other extremely potent energies. Babidi, as knowledgeable as he was, could tell that these were life force and ki. Eat the blue pearl one, and after Bu awakens, feed him the red pearl. He will grow exceptional strong, and your control over him will be tightened. Broly sat in silence while waiting for Babidi to eat the pearl. Babidi closed his eyes and hurriedly forced it down. He then opened his eyes as he felt his magic power increase. Broly nodded, and as he had finished what he wanted to, he stood up before disappearing with the whistle of the wind. Babidi was dumbfounded. He tremblingly packed away the red pearl and awakened his unconscious subordinates. He took a glance at the pearl in his robe with a glint of anticipation in his eyes. Broly had used some of the profound techniques of Para's energy manipulation. The pearl wouldn't only boost Majin Buu's power over time, but it would help the collective evil inside of Bu to take control over the Fat Bu. It would then transform into what would be known as Super Bu. As for the fact that Babidi's control would be strengthened, that was just a decoy. It certainly looks like this on the surface, but as soon as Super Bu reached a certain level of power, the blue pearl would just fry Babidi's brain. With that, he had settled the first villain that would be facing Goku and the crew, but there was a need for more. Even with that boost, Broly doubted if that Super Bu could stand up against Vegito. As he was deciding where to find his target, his contact device blinked. As he unlocked his device, a stream of data was being downloaded before it was presented to Broly. I guess fate is on my side. Let's return home then. As soon as he said that, he disappeared as he teleported back to Exaosia. He looked around the city and headed towards the biggest tower that was built not long ago. Broly slowly flew towards the tip and saw a red-skinned alien that was only slightly taller and looked just as old as Babidi. He looked at the little alien that was screaming at the top of his lungs that he would jump, and no one would be able to stop him from making this decision. Some Saiyans and other Exaosians saw this and began laughing. Broly couldn't help but grin as he looked at the little alien's face darkened when he was responded with, "Do a backflip," or "Jump pussy." Broly had seen every movie of Dragon Ball back in his past life, so he was well aware of who this person was and what he wanted. Like Babidi, it was an evil wizard and the last surviving member of the Kashvar, a race full of power-hungry evil wizards. They were responsible for the war on Konitz, the planet from which Tapion, the legendary hero, comes from. He and his brother had respectively one half of the behemoth, Hirudegarn, sealed inside their bodies. This demon was immensely powerful and could fight head-on with Super Saiyan 3 Goku at that point. It had weird abilities as it could dematerialize its body and materialize again elsewhere. This ability was ghostly and highly effective in a fight. Obviously, Hirudegarn was another opponent Broly had chosen for the Earthlings. Chapter 225, Gathering Villains 2. Ah! The alien screamed as he saw Broly floating next to him. He looked down again. "You won't be able to stop me. I am going to end my life. I can't take it anymore." Broly examined the wizard called Hoi before smiling. "You already got the lower half from Minosha?" Broly asked casually as if it was something trivial. Hoi was stunned and almost forgot to hold on to the hand railing, so he wouldn't fall down. "King Broly, what do you mean?" The wizard stammered. He became cautious as he looked at this Saiyan that was said to be vicious and inherently evil. He had never expected that the king out of all people would be the one that would come for his rescue. Especially after hearing his destructive nature, he had guessed that Broly would be the one that was the most apathetic to something like this. Now, however, he not only reached out to him first, but had revealed something that shouldn't be known to outsiders. After Broly had even mentioned the name of the Konatsian and the lower half, Hoi was sure that Broly would know more about what he was trying to do. Since he knew that Hoi wanted to revive the Phantom Majin, wasn't it the same as him knowing that Hoi wanted to stir up some trouble? Hoi could only swallow his salvia as he thought that he would be dying before he could fulfill his dream. He had only visited this planet as he had heard that Broly was able to revive his wife with some wishing orbs called Dragon Balls, and Hoi wanted to make use of them to get Tapion out of the box. Broly didn't say anything as he observed the wizard, making Hoi sweat bullets. "Let's have a chat over a drink," Broly suddenly said and flew towards what appeared to be a luxury restaurant. Huh. Hoi was stunned, not knowing what to think of Broly's invitation, but he didn't dare to make this evil Saiyan wait. Everyone in the underworld, who had as much as a brain, would never dare provoke or even look at Broly in the wrong way, unless they wanted to be destroyed. Broly ordered a large glass of beer and sat down in an armchair that seemed to look more expensive than some houses. With Broly on top, it looked like it was made for a king, and indeed, there was no other seat in this place that seemed to come close to the quality of Broly's. Hoi sat down to the chair Broly had pointed at. Hoi felt like he was visiting a mafia boss and he was owning him money. Broly waved the servant on the side towards him with his fingers. The servant placed a suitcase on the table and opened it. Suddenly some projections appeared and Broly began his little speech. The content of the conversation was similar to what he had said to Babidi. The only difference was that he said that Hoi must start operating at a specific time. Obviously, it was just at a time bit later than Buu's arrival, so the villains wouldn't appear at the same time. Hoi was to use the Z-Fighters to get to the Dragon Balls from Earth to bring Tap-Ion out of the music box. During the first moment the upper half got out of Tap-Ion, Hoi was to feed the demon a rainbow-colored pearl. It would immediately force the two halves together, and as the red pearl would do for Buu, it would strengthen the demon over time. However, what Broly didn't tell him was that the pearl was giving the monster some basic level of intelligence. Another blue pearl was also prepared for Hoi as well. Broly could only do this because they were wizards with frail bodies. Killing them once they consumed one of his inventions was as easy as breathing. He also told him to hide for a while on Earth until Hirudegarn became stronger. Broly hadn't worried about that fact with Buu as he had exceptional regenerative abilities, which were probably unrivaled in this universe. Hoi, of course, happily complied to kill off some Earthlings. He wanted to conquer the universe with this demon and would take any help he could get. He also felt the immense power in this pearl, and although he didn't know where Broly get it, that Saiyan could only blame himself for strengthening that ancient demon. As for if the pearl had any problems, Hoi didn't give it a second thought. Hoi was a great wizard. How could Broly match up to his level of knowledge? It is obvious that Broly thinks he can defeat this demon, but he is severely overestimating if he thinks that would the case. After getting the hands on Hirudegarn, who could stand in my way? Hoi thought as he put up a happy face. He thought that Broly didn't know about Hirudegarn's strength, but did he though? Obviously not. He even thought that the demon was too weak and tried to increase its capabilities. Broly saw the glint appear in Hoi's eyes for a second, but most importantly, he could read Hoi's thoughts. There was just too much of a gap between the two beings that every resistance through magic on Hoi's side was just a paper wall for Broly, especially considering that Hoi only had one type of energy barrier to protect his mind. Broly was more than proficient in the ways of magic to completely tear down any defenses of this great wizard. Broly quietly watched the wizard leave with the suitcase. Obviously, he had forced Hoi to eat the pearl to see if there arose a problem. I guess this wraps up number 2. He looked at the servant, who had turned into a Super Saiyan on Paris Island not long ago. Why did you know I would be coming here? Broly asked the Saiyan. Her Highness Kana had mentioned that you are addicted to this place's beer. By the way, where did you get the pearl? Broly asked as he thought he had taken all the pearls with him. As he searched his clothes, he was indeed missing the other pearls. Ahem. Kana said you forget them at her bedroom, my lord. She had ordered me to bring it to you. I see. Broly dismissed him. The servant bowed his head before standing to the side and waited for new orders. Broly looked at the giant beer glass on the table in front of him. He grabbed it and took a big sip. Ah, yes, I love it. Broly was probably the only one on this planet who went to the most expensive restaurant to order a simple beer. Should be somewhere here, right? Broly mumbled as he floated in the afterlife, searching for something. No, he wasn't dead. He was on the way to the last villain that would help him distract Goku for a while. No one knew that he had sneaked into the afterlife like this. Broly didn't know why the afterlife was so easily accessible by stronger people, but he didn't complain. He made his way to the place where the evil incarnate, Janemba, shall awaken. To create a more powerful version of this demon-like creature was a difficult task. It was more difficult than the others as he couldn't just tell the wizard controlling the monster to do him a favor. No, this time he had to spend much more time to create a pearl with some basic instructions embedded to it. It would appeal to the soul of the host and make him go towards Earth, and like Hirudegarn's pearl, it gave Janemba some intelligence. The pearl would only get active if it came in contact with evil energy, until then it was almost undetectable. Broly didn't know if this would work as the evil energy might influence his pearl, but he didn't worry too much about it. Even if Janemba only wreaked havoc in the afterlife, surely King Kai would ask of Goku's help, right? After a short moment, he arrived at his destination. He saw several giant capsules containing the evil energy of the souls that went to hell. Unfortunately, it seemed that the energy was truly collected for a long time, which meant that the energy wasn't thrown away, but remained here. That means Broly couldn't get more of this energy to supply the birth of Janemba. Broly waited for a second before one of the workers arrived. He didn't expect it, but it was the same young demon that later turned into Janemba. Weird, wasn't the event of Janemba only scheduled in the next few years, after the Buu saga? He squinted his eyes and analyzed the life force of that young demon. Unbelievable. That kid is a few hundred years old. Broly thought as he looked at the dancing kid. Well, these demons are being used for all kind of jobs in the afterlife. It makes sense that they have different time frames for their race's growth. However, even coming to that conclusion, Broly couldn't understand the fact that this demon that was much older than him behaved like a freaking teenager, dancing and listening to music on full blast. While he was supposed to guarantee the safety of something akin to a nuclear bomb, he just wanted to go to the kid and punch him in the face. The same goes to King Yema, who allowed this kid to work here without supervision. The demon then started singing along the lyrics of the song he was listening. As his voice sounded out, Broly's veins bulged on his forehead. "That's it, you are dead," Broly screamed out as he appeared in front of the kid in a flash. He punched the kid's face while placing the pearl inside him. He then disappeared again. The kid couldn't even catch a glimpse as he fainted immediately. King Yema unsuspectingly was sent flying not long after this happened. A tiny palm print appeared on his cheek. However, not able to find the culprit, King Yema could only drop this. Chapter 226. Initiating his rebirth. Broly sensed the location of these pearls that were meant for loyal subjects to make them stronger, but now they were serving the purpose of creating villains that would cause havoc on Earth. He knew where they were and what was happening to them, so he wasn't afraid of his plan going haywire. Just in case, though, he had placed several powerful Super Saiyans to monitor them from the distance. He even sent someone to the afterlife by teleporting them there. Of course, Broly told Ale, Zangya, and Ace that if the Z-Fighters couldn't handle the demons, they could try their luck killing them or help the Z-Fighters if they wanted to. He only told Aaliyah, Zangya, and Ace of his plans to go on Para's island to have his rebirth. The less people knew the better, and they weren't as careless with their words as the others were. So he put more trust into these three to keep it a secret. Ace would handle the instructions for the new Saiyans that would be going to Para, so they decided to go together. Broly wasn't sure how long it would take, so he handed complete control over to Aaliyah. If a great calamity befell them, they could only rely on themselves. However, with Aaliyah around, Broly didn't need to worry. When Broly was having a tour around Universe 6, she had led Exauja excellently. Broly knew that she would do better than everyone else. She had yearned to be the Science leader since her childhood. The things that she had learned back then couldn't easily be unlearned. Before he underwent this difficult transformation, he stayed on Exauja for a while. He was rarely on his own planet, so he was rarely seen by his clansmen. They were very respectful when they met him on the street, especially the Saiyans, who were unbelievable proud of their king. With the way they behaved, it was as if their own child had ascended to the throne. Broly was currently walking through the city center. It was remarkable how the city had evolved since the time Broly took over this planet. With the additionally trading planets that they had conquered or allied with, it was inevitable that the city would blossom. Technology was still advancing rapidly, and the streets were filled with fighting enthusiasts. Former secret techniques of all kinds of planets were being sold here like it was fish. Exaustian's population was growing and becoming stronger every second. The former strict entry examinations, which had been introduced after the assassins, had long been lifted. Many had visited Exauja and were still visiting. However, living here was too expensive for most aliens, and even if they had enough money, without strength or connections to back it up, one couldn't get foothold here. It was very difficult for outsiders to get in. It was much easier to become part of Broly's army, which allowed many a chance to get to live here. Of course, the person in question had to have made some contribution to Exauja. Most beings that lived on Broly's planet could be said to be formidable warriors wherever they went in the universe. However, no one would dare cause a ruckus on here. It was mostly because of the strong Saiyans that uphold the peace. Many pieces of land on Exauja were being supervised by so-called Tower Masters, basically Super Saiyans or beings on par, which were again supervised by those that were on the level of an ascended Super Saiyan, who were called Section Master. Of course, there were still the Planet Lords, which would consist of the S-Fighters and the other disciples of the City Lord. Basically, those that had exceeded normal true emperors and ascended Super Saiyans in power. Usually Tower Masters were enough to deal with the smaller noisy troublemakers. However, many emperors had strength that exceeded theirs, which would force the Section Masters to move out. So, most wouldn't resist if they got arrested, otherwise he would only end up dead. Broly was quite pleased by this kind of peacemaking, because if one did resist till the end, it would be those that were confident in their strength or speed to escape before those Section Masters made their move. Broly couldn't help but enjoy their shocked expressions when Broly popped up in front of them, blocking off their way of escape. They usually immediately gave up and prostrated. He took his time to enjoy a little tour through his territory and even visited the neighboring planets. He had visited his old friends, whose races were doing very well on their new planet. His day passed with him taking in his own territory for a while, usually accompanied by his wives or his friends, until the day of departure came. The next batch that were to go to Para's island was finalized, and they were prepared to move out. However, they weren't told to gather and were just quietly picked up by teleporting. Without anyone knowing about it, they would disappear from the face of the earth until most had reached the Super Saiyan level. Due to this secret training, most of the master positions were being held by Saiyans. The race was evidently rapidly growing stronger. The more than 100 Super Saiyans were more than enough to prove this, not even mentioning those that had ascended. How many emperors were usually in one galaxy? The average was 4 emperors per galaxy. True emperors were even lesser, with one rarely seen every 5th galaxy. The fact that Exausia could attack with a power of at least 25 galaxies at once was frightening. Exausia was already beyond a powerhouse. Exausia was the sole behemoth of Universe 7. Every corner of the universe knew of them by now. Their reputation had already spread beyond their area of direct influence. If the opponent wasn't insane, suicidal, or dumb, they would back away after knowing their target was an Exausian. After Broly had eradicated the ancient assassin organization that had assassinated his wife, his subject took him as an example and would head out immediately to take revenge. This made everyone apprehensive to provoke them, creating some tyrants amongst Exausians. Fortunately for the universe, Broly had set up central rules for their subordinates and would be severely punished if the higher-ups got to know of their crime. Exausia were also not known for being initiators or bullies, so they still could retain a rather decent reputation to their allies. Obviously, there was still corruption and tyrants among Exausia's ranks. Even if all kinds of restriction put up by Broly, it was difficult to solve this if it can be at all. Broly and Aize guided the next batch of young Saiyans to the island. After a few words of encouragement, Broly vanished in front of their sights. He wasn't worried that they leaked anything as they all made a contract, preventing them from saying anything about this island. This was also reason why nothing of this island was known by outsiders. He hurried over to the throne room of this island. The guardians of the throne directly kneeled down when Broly entered. He ignored them and directly went to the throne. He sat down as a sword appeared in his hand. It flashed for an instant, and before Broly could finish blinking, his surroundings had changed to a room of complete darkness. He felt like he was submerged in something, which was the high concentrated energy that had already liquefied and didn't let sunlight through. It was the place of conversion for the soul. The energy is to provide for the transformation. The island is sucking away energy from the surroundings and purifies it, and sends a large part of it in here. If Broly absorbed the energy around him and merged it into his being, his strength would instantly soar, but he didn't want to integrate it into his body, at least not this body. When he had visited this place for the conversion, he didn't realize how rich this place was as he had only concentrated on succeeding the transformation of his soul. Now sitting enclosed by pure energy, Broly would now begin his transformation. Without hesitating, he grasped the first sword tightly and initiated his rebirth. The sword glowed brightly as if it tried to banish the darkness in this place. Broly felt the energy boil as his body was being cooked alive. He then used his sword and slit open his own head. He directly died and his soul left the body immediately. The soul directly grasped the sword again. Broly's body took a while before it was being destroyed and purified to merge with this pool of energy. Broly ignored the liberating feeling of his being and concentrated on building his own body. He had first thought about recreating his body of his past life, but as soon as this thought came up, he had dismissed it again. He wasn't the same person from back on Earth. It wouldn't make sense for him to get back his old body. His soul had already merged with different energies, and with the Saiyan's power as well. He was no mere human anymore. He was Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan. Chapter 227, New Body. Broly's soul was flickering in the darkness as he put all his efforts in creating his new body. He started with his skeleton as the foundation, to be precise with his skull. Strangely, although he had to put all his efforts into redirecting the pure external and internal energy to form a skeleton, he couldn't shape it how he pleased. The form of his body was already pre-specified through his soul. When his skull had formed, he had finally a place to put his soul in. He was very sensitive to his environment, and by now he would be able to tell how much time has passed even if he had lived under a rock. However, in this place and without a body, he couldn't tell how many days he had already spent here. He just focused on internalizing the outside energy and use his soul to form his body. Everything else shall be trivial matters. His focus entered a state of absolute calm. He wasn't distracted by any thoughts and was wholeheartedly constructing his body. Time passed until he had constructed his skeleton. Next were his veins and flesh. At some point he had regained his sense of touch, which was one of the worst sensations Broly felt in his life. He had already dealt with immense pain in the past, but this was something else. It wasn't really pain he felt. It just felt like thousands of little worms were drilling their way through his body. It was incomparable, itchy, and disgusting. These moments of the reconstruction of his body was the most difficult part to maintain his focus in. He just wanted to chop off the itchy parts to get rid of this feeling, but he steeled himself to persevere through it. His whole body was being created through absolute pure life force. His body would be incomparable to any other beings in this universe. Broly felt that his growth would be skyrocketing the moment he started cultivating. All of his senses returned back to him after an unknown amount of time. He felt the tough skin was now crawling over his bloody body until it was fully enclosed by a layer of skin. Broly's mind during the time of his rebirth was blown away by the direction the soul was going for as it guided the energies to construct his body. It was the soul's instinct to create the body he was now occupying. It wasn't only that he felt satisfied with his body, but it didn't feel like he was occupying a body anymore. It was like his body was just another projection of his soul. He could feel every minute change in his body. Nothing escaped his senses. He felt his hair grow as he inspected his inner body. It looked almost the same with the exception that his body was now completely symmetrical from his skeleton to his organs. It was like there was a mirror in the middle of his body. He had already felt his organs arrange themselves to a perfectly balanced being previously, but now seeing the end result was a fantastic sight to be seen. A perfectly shaped body with absolute symmetrical muscles donned his body and involuntarily gave off an air of superiority. As soon as his last hair had grown, his soul burst an energy wave into every corner of his body, completing the construction in the process. He involuntarily shuddered in pleasure. He then opened his eyes and saw every energy particle in this room. The former dark room was now presenting all its secret to Broly's eyes. He even felt more pure energy gushing into the room, while it was expanding in size. The room was in fact not a room but a pocket dimension with a flexible size. With this, the owner wouldn't need to worry about not having enough place to store all this energy. Broly clenched his fists, but he didn't exit the dimension just yet. He crossed his legs and absorbed more of the energy. They were now gushing into his every cell. His cells were like the dry desert trying to store all the energy they could get without any ending in sight. He felt his power significantly grow every second while meditating. After days, weeks, or months, he felt saturated. He grasped his sword and left this pocket dimension and re-entered the throne hall. The moment he appeared on his throne, the two guardians appeared in front of him and kneeled on the ground. When Broly swept his gaze over their body, he could see all the intricacies of their body and how they made them the way they were now. When he looked around the room, he could see every atom of the object he looked at. Strangely, the huge influx of information didn't bother him at all, and his thoughts were racing through his mind. The Red Guardian had already opened his mouth after he had kneeled, but Broly had already walked past him. I know. Broly's voice already lingered in the air before the Guardian could say anything. His assessment that he would be slightly weaker when his body was created was right, but after he had meditated for an unknown amount of time, his strength had already far surpassed his former self. Every step he took was carrying him tens of kilometers. Although the body felt like a second soul, he was exceedingly stronger, which made it difficult for him to adjust. However, he himself didn't feel that he had grown, but rather that everything around him has gotten smaller. He knew that the place hadn't physically changed, it was just his own perspective of things. It took him an instant before he had traversed from the center of the island to the very edge of it. A group of people were gathered there. It seemed like they were preparing to leave again. Their clothes were just rags, and they were all covered in scars. They still looked like kids, but after going through the trial that is the island, they all had the air of a veteran around them. Broly approached them and directly landed in front of Ace, who had some additional scars on his body. As soon as Broly stood in front of him, Ace's eyes widened. Ace was shocked to the core. He felt like he was meeting a superior being and needed to kneel in front of him. He instantly knew who this person was. He looked slightly different than before. He was now only 2.10 meters tall, and his muscles seemed even stronger than before. His skin was pure, and his hair stood up as if he had transformed into a Super Saiyan. But this all didn't attract Ace's attention when Ace looked at him. Broly's pupils were gleaming in a gray-silvery hue, and his black hair had slight silver glow to it as well. His overall being exuded that of an everlasting ethereal divine, being that had gifted the existence with his appearance. Ace couldn't say anything as he was dumbfounded by Broly's change in appearance. Broly always had the attitude of a king, which made it easier for Ace to accept that this person even was Broly. Ace saw Broly smile, but to him, it looked like was eager for a bloody battle, but saw no one worthy to do battle with. It was like Broly didn't put them into his eyes at all. This was, of course, just a natural inferiority complex coming to light when Ace compared himself to Broly. Ace was convinced that the title of king wasn't enough to describe Broly anymore. Broly was more of an Omni-King than Lord Zeno himself. How bad is it? Broly's ethereal voice rang out, which made Ace gulp down and close his mouth. Broly waited for an answer, but to no avail. He then realized that he was influencing them with the pure energy he was leaking. In an instant this energy disappeared and Ace was given a way out of his stupor. His solemn expression returned to Ace as he started reporting. Your Excellency, the plan of creating villains for Goku hasn't exactly backfired, but the destination for their appearance has changed slightly. Broly didn't wait for Ace to finish as he already got the gist of it by reading Ace's mind. He enveloped the Saiyans with his energy and brought them off the island. They directly entered the spatial rift, but they didn't enter the normal universe. Broly directly teleported the others back to Exausia. The moment they were emerged on the planet's surface, a giant key sphere headed for the largest tower in the city. Broly only glanced at it, and the sphere was repelled at thrice the speed it came. Broly had already scanned the whole planet and frowned slightly before a smile returned on his face. Ace looked at Broly's changing expression. Ace knew that Broly was officially pissed. Chapter 228. Exausia under attack. Deep roaring sounds could be heard as a giant demon wreaked havoc on Exausia. Several dozen golden lights surrounded the demon and blasted at it with ki waves. The grand firework didn't seem to stop anytime soon. Hirudegarn, with its golden carapaces and a tiny pearl in the middle of its forehead, was running amok. The tower masters and section masters were only able to reduce the damage caused by this monster, while the planet lords, namely Aaliyah, Taro, and Kana, were the only ones that were able to deal some damage. Each of their Saiyan god transformation strength was no less than this demon's. With 3 Saiyans on that caliber, they were able to heavily suppress the horrifying Hirudegarn, and it looked like they were close to finishing it. Broly was surprised that they were able to wield God Ki, but after shortly thinking about it, it had been only a matter of time. He had been away for some years, so it had to be expected that they could at least reach this level of power. On the ground, Broly saw Tapion wielding his sword and inflicting some injuries to Hirudegarn. Next to him were Saiyans that Broly was more than familiar with. Trunks and Goten were fighting hard alongside Tapion, getting rid of the armies of aliens that were enough to block out the sunlight in the sky. Broly noticed that these kids had already ascended to the next level, and their strength overall was nothing to scoff at. These section master level kids were enough to decimate most in the army. Unfortunately, there were still more invading Exausia. In the distance, Broly recognized a pink demon that was fighting with Cell, Zangya, and Gohan. Gohan seemed to have somehow achieved his mystic form and had his power skyrocket since the last time Broly saw him, and that was when Gohan could unleash Super Saiyan 3. Cell had tremendous amount of ki, and unexpectedly, Zangya was using God Ki. Her hair was blazing red like the Saiyan gods, but since her normal transformation resulted in red hair as well, it didn't look much different to before. Even with the superior ki that Zangya was wielding, the other two with their huge amount of normal ki were able to stand shoulder to shoulder with her. Broly could even tell that Gohan had some God Ki inside his body as well, but it was too few to give him an advantage in a fight. Cell seemed different as well. One couldn't tell anymore that there were key signatures of different warriors inside him. In the past, everyone could have sensed that Cell was made out of DNA of Frieza, Piccolo, and so on. Now he appeared like any other individual. They fought hard, while they were almost getting absorbed a couple of times. However, this fight seemed to be in a stalemate, and with Buu's regenerative powers, it would only be a matter of time until they became disadvantaged. Even Exausia's elites were only able to distract him for a split second at a time. Buu also had a pearl between his eyebrow. Piccolo, Tien, and Krillin were fighting alongside Exausia Super Saiyans to fight off the Emperors and True Emperors that had joined the battle. A's countenance changed as he saw the same thing as Broly and immediately ordered the kids that just came from the island to join in on the battle. Broly swept his gaze around the battlefield before he looked at the fight in the far distance. A blue one and 3 red lights were entangling with each other as they fought. Every clash of them gave rise to thunderous booms. This fight, as well as the others, was putting immense pressure on the planet, Exausia. Good thing Broly had this planet fortified through the Dragon Balls. The control of the present fighters, of course, played a role, as well as the Namekian Dragon Balls wouldn't be able to strengthen the planet to endure godlike beings. Broly noticed the God Ki coming from this fight was immensely more powerful than that of the others. He observed how Raditz, Bardock, and Vegeta were fighting against Janemba, who was giving off a terribly strong and evil ki. Of course, he had Broly's pearl in his forehead as well. Vegeta had finally achieved Super Saiyan God. Broly thought it was more accurate to call the red version Saiyan God, as no Super Saiyan transformation was involved. Since Super Saiyan Blue was just the combination of Super Saiyan and God Ki, Broly deemed it more worthy to be called Super Saiyan God. The other names weren't really fitting. Broly wasn't going to call it with this tongue twister name, and he wouldn't call the other transformation with their colors either. Broly watched on for a while and saw that Janemba was by far the strongest among the attackers and could actually easily contend with Super Saiyan gods. Buu was about the same level as Hirudegarn with the power to best a Saiyan god. Hirudegarn wasn't weaker strength-wise, but his speed could be better. Of course, through his materializing, he could eradicate that flaw. Another show presented itself in the sky with a dazzling golden aura clashing with a blue one. They heavily clashed against each other and sent out terrifying attacks as if they tried to rip apart the sky. Every stray energy of these 4 fights was terrifying for the enemy's armies and Exausia's forces, which was why they all kept their distance from these areas. They headed somewhere else to bash each other's head in. Broly looked on as he saw Goku fight it out with Golden Cooler. Good thing was that Cooler wasn't even stronger than Janemba, but his strength was still enough to suppress Goku. Unfortunately, Cooler wasn't the last enemy they had to fight. Broly saw another golden light rapidly approaching. Unexpectedly, this was Golden Frieza. He would be disturbing the balance in this war. Broly's air around him hardly changed as his hair turned green. His eyes were still gray-silvery as he looked at Frieza. Suddenly, he took a single step forward and directly appeared in front of Frieza, who directly stopped his approach. "Oh, another monkey has come to greet me. Sorry, but there is no time. I have better things to do than entertain you." Frieza pointed at Broly with his finger and shot out a red beam. Frieza wasn't able to capture his movement as he sidestepped his attack. Without being able to resist, Broly already arrived in front of him and directly punched him in his guts. Broly then grasped Frieza's neck as he flew up high in the sky. Frieza struggled to get Broly's hand of his neck, but to no avail. Broly pressed a finger on his own lips. "Pshh, let me enjoy this," he said before focusing on the battles again. Crack. Frieza fainted and his body went limp as his neck was broken. Broly didn't even realize that he had accidentally clenched his hand too hard. Frieza's strength had already entered the domain of Saiyan gods, but he was just a chicken in front of Broly's perfect legendary Super Saiyan transformation after his rebirth. The fights were exciting and dazzling with all kinds of techniques. Broly's blood was boiling as he looked at their struggle. He was still pissed about Cooler showing his face here, trying to participate in the destruction of his empire, but he would get his fair share of Broly when the fight was done. Besides, he had hoped that Exauja wouldn't be completely left out by the fights against the demons. Broly didn't intend for the Pearls of Para to control the demons. They were just there to make them stronger and more intelligent to give the Z-Fighters a challenge. He had considered the possibilities that the Earthlings died against one of these demons, and then Exauja would come in to try their luck, but now everyone fought at the same time. Bu and Hirudegarn were also still alive. Each of them was meant to be defeated before the other demon arrived. He had planned for them to appear with half a year difference between each other, but now they were all fighting together. I guess this is fine as well, Broly thought as he looked at the bloody fights. When he just came back to Exauja a moment ago, he first wanted to directly bring an end to these fights, but after seeing his people give their all as they were pushed to the limits, he just couldn't help but stand back and enjoy the fights for the time being. Wasn't this what he wanted for his people, to grow from difficulties? If the others could hear his thoughts, he would be yelled at from every direction to stop being lazy and act already. Good thing no one was able to hear his thoughts. Of course, he wasn't just lazing around, he was scanning through the near periphery of the planet if there were some observers around, who might have orchestrated this, but to no avail. Chapter 229. The Demon King. Broly watched the battles in delight. Each and every one was a fight worthy of being the last one in a movie, yet they all were happening at the same time. Hirudegarn was the first that showed obvious weakening as the fight progressed. Although its strength and durability were through the roof, it was hardly limitless. Its ability wasn't as ghostly as Janemba's either, as Hirudegarn could only teleport with its complete body. The Saiyan gods were slowly but surely whittling down this phantom demon's power. After 30 minutes of fighting, it was already 1 foot in the grave, but the Saiyans weren't in their best form either. However, the Saiyans' victory was already assured. The demon seemed to have realized this point as well, and Broly could feel its unwillingness. Broly's mind blanked out for a second. Why can I feel its emotions? Broly thought as he looked at the giant roaring demon, who was constantly bombarded by other ascended Super Saiyans. While he pondered about it, he suddenly sensed Bu's rage as it was being pummeled into the ground by Cell. Zangya blasted a piece off of Bu, and due to her god ki, it was unable to restore itself completely. The potent god energy was obliterating the unusually strong life force in Bu's cells. He would need more time and energy to recuperate the loss than if he was destroyed by normal ki blasts. Bu still had the upper hand, as the only one capable enough to truly destroy his body was Zangya. The surroundings around Bu was completely deserted as he already absorbed every living being around. Janemba's fight was on another level. Vegeta faced him off head-on, while Raditz and Bardock annoyed Janemba from the sides. Janemba even had a red sword that was infused with a lot of magic power. It wouldn't easily crumble beneath his strength like in the movie. Janemba gave off a lot of evil ki and his roars were menacing. He was furious as he fought equally with Vegeta. Cooler and Goku were still bashing each other's heads in. Unfortunately for Goku, Cooler had a much higher mastery in this transformation than Frieza did in the series. His energy wouldn't easily deplete in this form. After a whole while, the two Super Saiyan gods finally took out their trump cards by internalizing their entire ki. An immense burden on their body, but their strength skyrocketed through it. Cooler was thrashed, and he anxiously looked around as if he waited for backup, but sadly Broly had already stopped Frieza's little intervention. The two Super Saiyan gods instantly won the upper hand with that technique and were about to destroy their enemies. Hirudegarn and Bu were coincidentally also on the verge of being defeated. Broly was a bit anxious as well. Was this it? Shouldn't there be a grand final battle? Where is the big bad guy? Cooler isn't a worthy final opponent, as are the other demons. Maybe if they all fused together, it would be more interesting. And what's up with this connection? The Z-Fighters and the Exaugians pushed on with all their might, while the demons struggle not to be destroyed. Just before the Z-Fighters could slay their enemies, a loud voice boomed, accompanied by a beastly roar. Enough! Every battle instantly halted in shock. The voice carried an intimidating force with it, which compelled them to look towards the source of it. High in the sky floated a tall man, who was holding a frost demon at its neck. As soon as the three demons saw Broly, they hurriedly turned to him and smiled brightly. Broly could feel their sincere delight about seeing their master. At the moment they turned towards Broly, he had a clear look at them. Only now did Broly realize that their soul was being imprisoned by the pearls. He was quite puzzled as of why they recognized him as his master, but he couldn't ponder about it for much longer. Ha ha ha, you are finally here. Cooler suddenly rushed towards Broly only to stop a few dozen meters in front of him. Your Highness, Cooler said sarcastically. You have finally made it and can join in on the fun. Broly was stunned before he realized something. The three demons quickly joined Cooler as they swore their undying loyalty through the pearl. They asked Broly if they did a good job in wreaking havoc on this planet. Broly turned towards Cooler, who was grinning slyly. Cooler then showed him the blue pearls in his palm that Broly had given to the evil wizards. You little shit dash, Broly was about to lop off Cooler's head, but he was interrupted by another voice. A furious and heroic voice that seemed to want to fight off every evil present. You finally made it out, huh? Goku flew forwards with the other warriors in tow. The Earthlings looked furiously at Broly, who was floating above the demons they had fought just a second ago. You bastard, what do you gain from this? Why would you make them suffer? Krillin added as he looked at Broly with hate. Exactly. Why would I attack my own people and city? Broly was amused at Krillin's outrage. We already know that Exhaustion's forces had managed to seal you away for the past 3 years. It's obvious that you used these demons to break you out of it, Tien added as he calmly looked at the mastermind. Broly didn't pay any attention to the Earthlings anymore as he suddenly disappeared from their sight. Cooler was urging the demons to attack Broly, but they wouldn't move a budge. Just as Cooler was prepared to attack himself, Broly had made his move first. Cooler couldn't even react to it at all, and could only turn back to look at Broly, who was already behind him. Broly retracted his hand and put it back in his pocket as Cooler suddenly split in half. Broly glanced at the two body pieces, and they started to slowly incinerate into ash. The Z-Fighters were stunned by his movements. Goku and Vegeta were only able to catch a glimpse of Broly until Cooler already died. So, even his followers aren't safe? Piccolo said as he looked at Cooler being incinerated. Broly ignored their reaction and looked over to the Exhaustions that were floating at the side. I said you could try your luck, but I never said to bring them here. By the way, what's up with me being sealed? Where did they get that idea from? Broly asked as he looked at his wives and his friends. No one said anything as they looked at each other until Taro raised his hand cautiously. When Cooler first came here with Hirudegarn, I thought that he was part of your plan, and when the Z-Fighters came in shortly after, I was even more convinced that this was supposed to happen. So, I made something up? Yeah, I thought this was part of the show. Me as well. Kana, Aaliyah and the others confirmed this as well. So, let me get this straight. Cooler used my pearl that he stole from the wizards to somehow convince these demons to attack my city, while you guys defended against them with the assistance of these Earthlings, who thought that these demons were trying to break me out of the seal that you had put me in. Did I get this right? The Exhaustions nodded in agreement. Oh boy. Broly pinched the bridge of his nose, while the Earthlings were looking at them in confusion. Wait, you didn't seal him, and Cooler wasn't working for Broly? Goku asked them. Raditz sighed out in annoyance, and Broly could tell that he was tired of this charade, and so was Broly, however. Not now. You'll bow down to your king. Broly's voice bellowed while the pressure forced the demons to bow down on the ground. Another energy enveloped the Earthlings as Broly turned to them. You do not belong here. Go home. The energy seemed to have been activated, and the Earthlings all disappeared at the same time. Broly's aura retracted before he swept his glance across his destroyed city. I guess I need to clean up a bit. Cooler, you should have had more patience. Broly thought. You stand down for now, and Bu just accept the energy in a few moments. Broly ordered the demons, who acknowledged it with a grunt before he headed out to find the Dragon Balls. It didn't take him long until he gathered all the Dragon Balls from the Namekians and wished back all the victims that died under the hands of the demons during these past few years, when Cooler was active. Broly was in luck as the Namekian, who had created their Dragon Balls, grew stronger. Fortunately, most damage only happened during the last few months, as seemed like Cooler had recognized that they were growing stronger after his first attempt and waited for some time to let them grow. Chapter 230, Revelation. Broly was standing in his training chamber with 3 demons in front of him. To be more precise, the Phantom Demon, Hirudegarn, the Majin Demon, Super Bu, and the evil incarnate, Janemba, which would make him not a demon. Well, the host of Janemba was originally a demon kid, so Broly still called the trio the Demon Squad. In the last few days, he had tested their capabilities and noticed that they were still getting stronger. However, the pearl would be exhausted soon. As soon as the pearl lost its strengthening method, their strength would rise slower than it would have without the pearl. There were no such things as free meals. The pearl had greatly exhausted their potential and lowered their upper power limit, which meant that they wouldn't only get stronger slower, but they would never reach the same level they could have with normal training. Of course, if Broly removed their limit and severed their connection to the universe, after recovering, they could regain their normal growth of power and eventually exceed even beings like Lord Zeno. However, Broly has yet to understand how he can sever the connection without ripping the soul in half. Fortunately, there were other insights he gained during his transformation. Hirudegarn and Bu weren't problematic after the pearl ran out of juice, but Janemba was different. Janemba wasn't born this way. There was just a lot of evil energy that had invaded his body, creating the being that now kneeled in front of Broly. However, if the pearl was exhausted, the evil energy would slowly dissipate. It did Janemba a favor that his host was a demon, but using demonic ki or evil ki was still different. If he couldn't get nurtured through the pearl, Janemba would only lose power over time, eventually returning back to the demon kid. Obviously, Broly wouldn't just let go of such a strong subordinate, so he thought about tempering with Janemba's soul. He just had to guide the evil ki into the demon kid's soul, and after infecting the soul, Janemba would be complete. Of course, Janemba would be evil thorough, but Broly didn't really care as long as he listened to his orders and benefited him. After finishing his examination, he ordered them to go to A's, who would tell them what to do next. Broly was rather satisfied, as they seemed to be very obediently. Broly went and took Aaliyah with him as he teleported them to Earth. He directly appeared above Bulma's courtyard, which was like the Z Fighters' headquarters as they usually met up here. As expected, Broly and Aaliyah instantly saw the Earthlings treat their wounds. Bulma was frowning deeply as she had heard of the events that took place on Exausia. They also had noticed that many Earthlings had been revived just a few hours ago. Dend was alive as well, and the Earthlings' Dragon Balls were restored. After Hirudegarn was revived by Cooler, he had destroyed the Dragon Balls, so that one more variable was eradicated. Fortunately, he didn't seem to know of the Namekian Dragon Balls. Even if he did, with Broly's current strength, it was easy to gather the Super Dragon Balls again. Just as Broly and Aaliyah appeared above them, the Z Fighters noticed Aaliyah. As for Broly, he was only discovered after they had looked up. They all jumped up and took on a battle stance, but Broly remained causally as they landed. Aaliyah looked a bit embarrassed and apologetic. Broly ignored the barking Earthlings and headed to Jine. Goku stepped in front of her, trying to shield her from Broly, but unexpectedly Jine walked past him. "Hey Jine, hope you are doing well," Broly said as he greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "Hey Broly, nice to see you." Jine responded happily. "Raditz, Bardock." Broly shook their hands and then pointed at some chairs. "Let's sit down and have a talk." The Earthlings traded some looks of disbelief of what just happened. Hadn't Jine and Raditz fled from Broly? Why were they so familiar with each other? After a few hours of storytelling, the Earthlings looked as if they had just lost their soul. "No, this isn't okay." Bulma screamed her lungs out. "Goku, they have lied to you all this time, while Broly threatened to kill us, since years ago." She was heaving heavily as she looked at the stupid, smiling Goku. "Well, they said that they did this to make me stronger, and I am definitely way stronger than I could have been without the pressure." "Ha ha ha," Goku said happily while stuffing a steak in his mouth. "Bulma, calm down." Vegeta unexpectedly added, "This is a normal for Saiyans. When I was 3 years old, my parents had planned out several scenarios during our journeys. I remember this one time, when I was kidnapped by pirates and had to fight my way out to freedom only to be greeted by my father with a grand banquet," Vegeta said while lingering in nostalgia. He closed his eyes and smiled silently. "Is there more steak?" Broly held up his empty plate towards the dumbfounded Bulma. She stared at the plate and then at Broly. She angrily ripped it out of his hands and left while grunting, "Fucking insensible Saiyan imbeciles." Gohan could have been something, a great scholar. Chi-Chi mumbled as she sat weakly on a bench with fried tear stains on her cheeks, while Puar and Oolong were offering some napkins to her. Gohan supported her mother awkwardly as he obviously heard her complaints. "So, that was why you gave us the modified Kaioken. You wanted us to get stronger?" Tien exclaimed as he thought about all the events that had occurred until now. "Yeah," Broly said with a full mouth as he devoured the meal that the Bulma's chefs had brought. "I saw your potential and thought you would make some good assistants in the future, maybe even rivals. Even the king speaks with his mouth full. Well, so does the prince." Tien took a glance at Vegeta, who seemed to have sensed it and directly shot a glare back. "What was the deal with these demons anyway? What did you mean by Cooler stole your pearls?" Piccolo added, when the others calmed down considerably. Cough. I heard of some rumors of these demons sealed away, so I thought I used some wizards to revive them. The pearls were meant to make the demons and the wizards stronger. With this, the wizards could control the demons to attack you. The pearls strengthened the demons over time, so after Cooler went into hiding with them, they were a lot stronger than I originally thought they would be. "I see. So, before we could defeat them, Cooler had snatched them away and attacked your city instead?" Krillin said with an understanding nod. "Why did you make them stronger with the pearls? How would you know they would be too weak otherwise?" The Supreme Kai said that Bu was a demon that was sealed a long time ago, and his strength was just described as immeasurable. Piccolo said while squinting slightly. He observed Broly closely as continually questioned him. Well, I can travel through time, Sue? Broly didn't describe anything in detail, but they knew what he was hinting at. They already knew of time travelers like Trunks. The only difference between the two was that Trunks wanted to save them, while Broly wanted them to struggle even more. And where were you during their attack on your city? Piccolo still continued with his interrogation as if he couldn't believe that Broly wasn't a bad guy, just someone overly Saiyan, which wasn't a good thing either, as Saiyans are seen as a ruthless warrior race. I was having a breakthrough in my transformation, so I secluded myself in a far-off galaxy, Broly said casually. This, however, had aroused Vegeta's and Goku's interest. Unfortunately, Broly didn't reveal anything. All this to motivate us to get stronger. Couldn't you just have sparred with us? Tien asked helplessly. Well, it had to be a real threat. Otherwise you wouldn't break through your current limit, Broly responded while finishing another steak. He looked over to Aaliyah, who had a happy conversation with Jine on another bench. Wait, a real threat? I thought you orchestrated this so could train us? Krillin screamed out, while his eyes opened wide. Broly chuckled slightly as he looked at his expression, a shocked, bald, hairless, noseless midget monk. This sounds like the start of a bad joke, Broly thought as he answered casually. I ordered them to kill you, obviously. What? Don't give me that look. I would have revived you with the Dragon Balls from Namek? Broly held up his hands in defense, as he then pointed at Goku. Besides, I only did it to distract that idiot. I didn't want him to remind Lord Zeno of the tournament that he had mentioned. After all, this tournament will probably decide if our whole universe gets erased or not. So, Goku, just stay put for another year or so. He already did, Vegeta said while his face darkened slightly. Huh. Broly froze as he grabbed towards another steak and looked over to the former prince. Vegeta took a deep breath, which couldn't hide his annoyance towards Goku before he continued. He already went to Lord Zeno and asked him to hold the tournament.